Amidst an atmosphere thick with despair and confusion, most of the remaining disciples finally chose to abandon the road that seemed to promise only endless death. Their eyes were wide with fear and bewilderment, convinced that the Busujima family's training was not the path of true warriors, but some kind of unspeakable madness. They couldn't understand why the Busujimas insisted on continuing, and they were even more bewildered that Shinichiro Busujima made no effort to stop their flight. Shinichiro watched them go with a cold, unblinking gaze, utterly undisturbed. He had expected this all along. In his eyes, a genuine warrior must be free of fear and unshaken by hardship. Those who turn tail at the first sign of danger simply aren't resolute enough to walk the ultimate path the Busujima family has chosen. What they seek are people willing to live and die alongside them, warriors ready to face any trial, no matter how perilous, without complaint or question. What are they up to? That question has echoed through the intelligence offices of the island nation, across the corridors of power in Washington, and everywhere in between. Elite agents from every major foreign service have been dispatched to pierce the Busujima family's veil of secrecy. They lurk in the shadows, tracking every movement, yet the family's true intentions remain as elusive as morning mist. Some analysts theorize that the Busujimas are searching for a way to boost spiritual power through live combat drills. But survivors who escape the family's compound dismiss that idea outright. According to them, no arcane secrets of spirit cultivation were ever taught, only ruthless, life-or-death battles against monstrous creatures purportedly to hone their disciples' swordsmanship. To the outside world, it sounds positively insane. "They're lunatics," has become the refrain, whispered from one end of the island to the other, and even around the globe. Ethan Busujima had never cared what outsiders thought of his family's methods. To the rest of the world, the idea of forging a samurai spirit by confronting monsters and restless ghosts sounded like something out of a B-movie. Yet that was exactly the Busujima way. Ethan's sole obsession was to awaken the true power slumbering in his soul. In his hand, he carried a sword of rare, secret-forged alloy, its edge honed specifically to cut through the toughest hide of eldritch beasts. So far, he'd already dispatched several facehuggers, each one draining a surge of demonic energy into his blade. But to his surprise, their malevolent force hadn't stirred any real response in his inner spirit. He frowned as he reflected on his victories. Are these creatures not fierce enough? Or is their darkness too shallow to press against my own? Resolute, Ethan vowed to seek out more formidable opponents, demons and monsters whispered of only in fearful legends. He believed that only by teetering on the razor's edge between life and death could he shatter his limits and finally ignite the spiritual power he craved. Within the Busujima clan, such daring was commonplace. But for Ethan, this next trial would determine whether he truly had the heart of a samurai, or merely the blade. The bodyguards, assassins, and martial artists employed by the K-Balls had converged on Tokyo, each driven by the same burning ambition to transcend human limits. In this era, becoming transcendent offered the highest glory, unrivaled status, and power beyond ordinary reach. To earn that rank, they pursued merciless battles against the city's monsters, using every encounter to hone their bodies and strengthen their resolve. As night fell, demon roars and human screams echoed through Tokyo's narrow streets. A war without gunpowder, yet more brutal than any conventional conflict. Amid the chaos, a solitary figure moved with unwavering purpose. Clad only in a pair of boxer briefs and armed with nothing but his bare fists, he strode through the darkness like a beacon. Ethan was in his late 20s. His short, jet-black hair was tousled by a gentle breeze, and his physique was sculpted to perfection, as if Michelangelo himself had chiseled every line. Powerful yet graceful, his muscles spoke of countless battles and unyielding discipline. Though he wore the bare minimum, his presence radiated an unspoken power that no garment could ever conceal. Ethan had already stalked and slain half a dozen facehuggers in this cavern, each grotesque alien parasite a mere warm-up. But nothing had prepared him for the abomination before him now. Its lower body was a nightmarish fusion of spider and scorpion. 8 bristling legs skittered across the rock, and a massive, barbed tail trailed behind, its stinger glinting coldly in the dim light. Above that lurked a chitinous carapace, part mantis, part beetle, emitting a rank stench that made his stomach churn. He drew a slow, steady breath, channeling every ounce of focus into the present moment. One slip here could cost him his life. Muscles coiled, he launched himself forward in a seamless volley of kicks, first the whirling sweep of the Erhu style, then the brutal power of the King Kong strike, and finally the fearsome iron breaking kick. His last blow cut through the stale air like a great battle axe, a high, keening whistle of steel on wind. For a heartbeat, Ethan dared to hope it would land. The creature, its beady compound eyes shimmering, raised its scimitar-sharp forelimbs just in time. The impact rang out in a harsh crash of chitin against bone-hardened steel. Sparks flickered where his boot met its armored arm, and the cavern walls echoed with the clash. Ethan staggered back, hips twisting to absorb the feedback. He ground his teeth around the metallic taste of adrenaline and blood. The monster advanced, each movement precise and fluid, as though it had fought 1,000 battles. Ethan wiped sweat and grime from his brow, forced himself to calm his racing heart. This was no mere hunt. It was a fight for survival, and he refused to be its prey. Ethan's lips curved into a faint smirk, his normally impassive face suddenly alight with keen interest. Far from discouraged by the monster's failed strike, he felt only exhilaration. He knew that only by facing ever-stronger opponents could he hone his own power. The creature let out a challenge-like shriek and lashed out again with its mantis-like forearms, so quickly their blades gleamed in the dim light. Ethan braced himself, then surged forward, hands open and unarmed, directly into the path of those razor-sharp limbs. At the last instant, he twisted his torso and shifted his weight to the right. His body went as soft and pliant as a willow leaf, allowing the deadly scimitars to slice through the air around him without so much as nicking his clothing. Two-tiger technique, cow-style, flowing body, he intoned in his mind, every syllable guiding his effortless, fluid movement. Seizing the opening, Ethan pivoted on one foot, letting momentum carry him into midair. He slipped between the demon's massive claws with ghost-like grace and closed in on its exposed flank. Two-tiger technique, fire sky, phantom step, he whispered, unleashing his next skill with calm precision. Ethan blurred across the clearing, leaving only a faint afterimage in his wake. The demon's swing cut through empty air as it missed him once more. Seizing the opening, Ethan surged forward and locked his arms around the creature's huge forearms, each as thick as a human waist. The demon roared in fury, its muscles straining as it thrashed to break free. But it had overextended itself. With the beast off balance, Ethan drew in a deep breath and unleashed his signature technique, Erhuliu Shuitianqing Shuifan. Summoning every ounce of his strength, he hoisted the massive demon off its feet and flung it aside like a discarded rag. The impact echoed through the night as the creature crashed to the ground, stunned and defeated. Chapter 1143, Spiritual Power, a Reward and Gift to the Brave. A thunderous roar split the air as the demon drew a blazing arc overhead and slammed into the nearby forest like a meteor. The impact hit with the force of a landslide, sending great pines crashing down in a chain reaction. Branches snapped apart, leaves rained through the sky, and a choking cloud of dust billowed over the shattered clearing, turning it into a scene of utter devastation. Ethan staggered forward through the wreckage, every breath ragged, his chest rising and falling with exhausting effort. Sweat plastered his shirt to his skin, and beads of perspiration slid down his temples before splattering onto the parched ground. Yet despite his fatigue, his eyes burned with fierce resolve. He had just defeated another formidable adversary, a victory that not only proved his growing power, but also marked another hard-won step on this treacherous path. As the dust slowly settled, a warm surge blossomed in Ethan's chest. It was the unmistakable pulse of spiritual power, an awakening reserved for the bravest souls who dared to stand against monsters that ordinary weapons could not fell. He knew the fallen creature had been one of the dangerous skeleton soldiers, demons whose resilience far surpassed anything a conventional firearm could handle. Ethan tightened his grip on his rifle, every muscle coiled and alert. Though this foe lay broken among the ruined trees, he could not afford complacency. In this world of shadows and slaughter, only those who embraced their spiritual gifts could hope to survive, and Ethan was determined to wield his to the fullest. Ethan was only human, no magic, just flesh, blood, and an unbreakable will. His only weapons were his razor-sharp skills and indomitable spirit. Facing the towering beast, he danced around its thunderous blows, always staying just out of reach while watching for the perfect moment to strike back. He knew he stood little real chance, his foe's raw power and speed far outmatched any mortal. Yet each missed hit only ignited his determination. A deafening roar ripped through the air, a wail torn from the gates of hell. The creature lunged again, its enormous bulk sweeping across the square like a hurricane. A single strike could topple a car. But Ethan was a blur of motion, a swallow weaving through a storm. He slipped effortlessly between its legs and arms, eyes never leaving the slightest opening. "That's it! Give me more!" he shouted, landing a precise kick against the monster's knee. "Only when you go all out will we find him." Across the city block, another clash sent reverberations through the night. A burly warrior in a jet-black gi, his build as solid and fearsome as a bear's, held his ground against a snarling fish-like abomination. Sparks flew as weapon met scale, and the distant din of their battle joined the roar of Ethan's own fight. Ethan stood alone on the rocky shoreline, muscles coiled like a spring. As a celebrated martial arts master in this region, he instinctively shifted into the cat's paw stance, a posture that, by fine-tuning one's center of gravity, unleashes devastating power in the blink of an eye. Yet even this signature move felt almost hopeless against the nightmarish creature lumbering toward him. The monster appeared born of a twisted mutation in Tokyo Bay, a shark's head bristling with rows of razor teeth, 8 octopus-like tentacles that lashed the air with gale-force blasts, and crushing, crab-like claws capable of rending stone. Its hulking body gleamed under the sun, scales flashing like shards of ice. Every time it flexed a tentacle, the wind howled as though reality itself might tear apart. Ethan's calm foresight, years of disciplined training, proved no match for such an unpredictable foe. One moment the creature lunged with lightning speed. The next, it slithered forward in a silent undersea current. Each strike threatened to overwhelm him, each feint dissolved his perfect defense. And yet, with every fiber of his being, Ethan held his ground, ready to turn the monster's fury against itself. Ethan's gaze locked onto the fish demon's every twitch, hunting for a pattern in its sinuous movements. Yet each time he thought he'd anticipated its next strike, the creature seemed to sense his intent and shifted its assault at the last possible moment. Sharp, serrated tentacles slashed across his arms and torso, carving deep wounds that bared white bone and stained his collar crimson. He staggered back, breath coming ragged. Impossible. How could my foresight fail me? He'd spent years honing his perceived advantage, melding disciplined martial training with near precognitive insight, but against this fiend, all of it felt useless. Before he could regroup, the demon struck again, not with wild flails this time, but by weaving those tentacles into an almost airtight net of blades. Ethan barely dodged the first barrage, only to be hammered by second and third waves of whipping limbs. Clinging to pure instinct and the muscle memory forged in countless skirmishes, he forced himself to maintain his guard, searching desperately for the one opening that might turn the tide. With a thunderous crack, a massive force slammed into Heimu Swanjai, propelling him backward until he smashed into the earth. Dust rose in a choking cloud as he struggled to his feet, every nerve afire, as if his bones themselves were crying out in protest. He refused to stay down. Drawing a ragged breath, he planted his feet and steeled himself for the next wave of assaults. Ethan watched the brutal clash unfold. The martial artists and sword masters were undeniably powerful, their techniques precise and deadly, yet they seemed helpless against these fiends driven by demonic energy. Still, it was their indomitable spirit that earned his genuine respect. "Spiritual power is nature's gift to the brave," he murmured, his tone soft but unwavering. "You who risk everything in pursuit of martial perfection, may your courage find its rightful reward." Ethan raised his hands slowly, palm turned upward, as if summoning some unseen force from the heavens to aid those who dared to stand and fight. Ethan shifted his stance, and the air around him rippled. Warm, mysterious energy swirled inward, coalescing into a radiant orb in the palm of his hand. He stared at it for a moment, gauging its power, then let it flare. Across the battlefield, Shinichiro Dokushima teetered on the brink of collapse. His left arm dangled uselessly at his side, and blood streamed in a thin rivulet down half his face, staining his cheek scarlet. Before him loomed the granite rock tiger, a demonic beast at least 4 meters from nose to tail and standing over 2 meters tall at the shoulder. Its hide was not fur, but jagged, iron-hard plates of stone, as if it had been carved from the very heart of the earth. No sword blade dared bite into that living armor. The tiger snarled, grinding Shinichiro's shattered hand between its massive jaws. Each crunch echoed like mocking laughter. The sheer bulk of the creature pressed the surrounding air into tension, and with every breath it exhaled, the ground beneath trembled. Even an alloy blade, tempered to the finest edge, could not scar those rocky scales. Shinichiro's eyes burned with determination and desperation as he prepared for one last impossible strike. Faced with an almost invincible foe, Ethan and Shinichiro Busujima's disciples and family have suffered devastating losses. Despair and fear writhe in their eyes. Chapter 1144, The Awakening of Spiritual Power. Is this truly the end? Busujima Shinichiro thought, but he immediately shook his head. As head of the Busujima family and the inheritor of its martial legacy, he couldn't afford to give up. His eyes swept the battlefield, taking in the fallen and the determined gazes of his surviving disciples. He knew he had to rise again and show them the way. "Psycho," he called out, voice steady, "I leave the Busujima family in your hands." No matter how this battle ended, the clan would need new leadership, someone capable of guiding them forward. Shinichiro was certain Psycho was that person. Drawing a deep, steadying breath, he stifled his fear and pain. Clutching his dagger in one hand, he rose to his feet and launched himself at the rock tiger with renewed vigor. Every step he took exuded the dignity and pride of a warrior. His blade flashed along the creature's crystalline flank. Though it left no lasting wound, the strike angered the beast, provoking an even more ferocious assault. Ethan's spiritual power poured down over the scarred battlefield like a life-giving rain. Warm yet potent, it moved as an invisible current, wrapping every fighter in its embrace. Kuroki Gensai, Busujima Shinichiro, and all the martial artists still locked in deadly combat with the monsters. Each of them felt a surge of energy unlike anything they'd known, as if the very spiritual forces of heaven and earth had answered their call, granting them a sudden, dramatic leap in strength. In that instant, Kuroki Gensai's prophetic vision blazed back to life. He tracked the fish demon's attack trajectory with razor-sharp clarity and even anticipated its next strike before it was launched. To him, this gift was a guiding light in the darkness, mapping out each move with unerring precision. Seizing the moment, he struck back. His fists and feet pounded into the demon like a torrential storm, limbs once as solid as stone now buckling and cracking beneath the force of his blows. A piercing shriek tore from the creature's throat as its assault collapsed into chaotic, ragged swings. At the same time, Busujima Shinichiro felt his own doubts evaporate under Ethan's blessing. With renewed focus, he deflected incoming attacks effortlessly, every parry and riposte executed with the calm certainty of a master swordsman. Around them, the other martial artists, once weary and bloodied, found their spirits reignited. United by Ethan's spiritual reign, they pressed the advantage, turning the tide of battle against the monstrous horde. Kuroki Gensai seized the moment and landed a crushing blow on the fish demon's head. Confusion flickered in its eyes before the creature collapsed, utterly still. At the same instant, Busujima Shinichiro felt the power's blessing surge through him, his reflexes sharpened and his strength multiplied. With a deft sidestep, Shinichiro slipped in close to the rock tiger, spotting a weakness in its armored hide. Like a wraith, he materialized at its flank and swung his long blade with every ounce of his newfound power. The ring of metal on stone echoed through the clearing as the blade scored a deep fissure in the beast's thick hide. The rock tiger bellowed in agony, its assault faltering under the strike. Shinichiro's eyes gleamed with triumph, but he held his ground. He whirled his blade in a relentless dance, meeting the tiger's faltering charge blade to claw. Sparks flew with each clash until, at last, a final, thunderous blow sent the rock tiger sprawling to the earth, its massive form shuddering in defeat. Ethan Busujima watched as the creature's eyes flickered with reluctance and despair, and then finally closed. He stood beside Iwatora, sliding his long sword back into its scabbard. Despite the wariness etched into his face, a satisfied smile bloomed. He had just transcended a trial of life and death, and now he tasted something entirely new: spiritual power. The shock of it still thrummed through his veins. "Is this what they call spiritual power? It's incredible," Ethan murmured, running a hand along the empty sleeve where his arm had been. He'd paid a steep price for this gift, his arm. But in this moment, the loss felt insignificant beside the boundless energy surging within him. As Ethan's own power awakened, the other fighters on the island felt a strange warmth ignite in their cores. It was as if a flame had been kindled in their souls, filling them with unprecedented strength and speed. Wherever that power would lead them next, none could deny its promise and its danger. The sudden emergence of this new force immediately drew the sharp focus of the island nation's two dominant factions and of the United States. At the summit of power, no fear is more profound than the fear of death. Straddling the boundary between life and oblivion, humanity's most basic anxieties lie in wait. When they were young, many of these figures marshaled their intellect and courage to ascend the ladder of influence, reveling in the unending glory that wealth and status can bring. But as the years slip away like water through one's fingers, the shadow of mortality advances imperceptibly, until one day its weight becomes undeniable. Then the terror of losing everything surges like a tidal wave, sowing rage, restlessness, and, even in the most disciplined minds, a creeping madness. History offers no shortage of such stories. Emperors who once commanded legions, generals who led armies, celebrated innovators and towering scientists, all of them fell prey, in their later years, to strange lapses in judgment. Not because they had lost their genius, but because time's unrelenting passage and the certainty of death pressed upon them with ruthless clarity. In the face of that ultimate end, the greatest among us can behave in ways the world would have sworn were impossible. For those who once held supreme power and basked in ultimate glory, the hardest truth to swallow is that life must end. Refusing to yield to mortality, they have pursued every conceivable means to cheat death and prolong their reign. Some commissioned opulent mausoleums, hoping to preserve their honor beyond the grave. Others dispatched envoys across treacherous seas in search of the fabled elixir of life. Still more risked everything on forbidden rituals and arcane experiments, each driven by the single, desperate wish for one more day, one more breath. Then came the awakening of spiritual power among fighters and martial artists, a revelation that cast open a new door for those who yearned to transcend life and death. They flocked to secret libraries and ancient masters, eager to unlock the hidden potential of their chi and channel it into incomparable strength. Whispers spread of techniques that could heal grievous wounds, shatter mountains, or even suspend the decay of time itself. Yet despite the fervor, only a handful ever truly awakened their inner energies. Most novices fell in battle, their untested powers snuffed out by ravenous beasts or demonic fiends. A select few defied every rule and command, striking out on their own dark paths to amplify their gifts by any means necessary, no matter what or whom they sacrificed. Still, the tide of ambition only grows. Kingdoms tremble as an emerging generation of spirit wielders challenges the old order, hoping to master secrets that might carry them beyond mortality. And at the heart of it all stands Ethan, a young fighter whose own spiritual awakening may not only reshape his destiny, but alter the fate of the world itself. I'd be happy to help polish the chapter. Could you please paste the full text you'd like me to rewrite? Once I have the complete passage, I can smoothly rename Luther to Ethan, confirm his gender, and produce a coherent, idiomatic English version. Chapter 1145, Living Toward Death. Can spiritual power really be awakened by fighting monsters? A heavy, solemn silence fell over the conference room. Around the long table sat the kingdom's most influential figures, military commanders, noble patrons, and leading scholars. Their faces were drawn tight with urgency, for this question struck at their deepest instincts, the pursuit of power, and above all, the will to survive. Scattered across the polished mahogany table lay stacks of field reports and data charts. These documents had been collected from volunteers, elite fighters who'd agreed to undergo scientific observation as they faced the horrors beyond the city walls. Their raw accounts, along with biometric readings and energy scans, formed the backbone of the researchers' hypothesis. At the head of the table stood Dr. Calder, the research division's chief scientist. A man in his late 40s with steely eyes and a serious demeanor, he clicked the projector remote and flicked through slide after slide of graphs and battle footage. His voice was measured, yet carried an undercurrent of excitement. "Our working hypothesis," he began, "draws on combat data from 12 volunteer fighters, cross-referenced with the ancestral records of the Busujima family. Time and again, we've observed a startling pattern. Periods of extreme stress or near-death encounters seem to trigger sudden spikes in the subject's dormant energy signatures, what tradition calls spiritual power." He paused, letting that claim hang in the charged air. Shifting to the next slide, he highlighted a fighter's vital signs during a monster ambush. Here, you can see heart rate and neural activity surge before a corresponding uptick in their energy output. While not every subject achieved a full awakening, the correlation is undeniable. Murmurs rippled around the table. Some faces betrayed skepticism, others guarded hope. Outside the tall windows, the wind howled against the fortress walls, as if echoing the same question that weighed on every mind in the room. If battling monsters truly unlocked hidden powers, could humanity wield that force and survive the price it demanded? We suspect that spiritual awakening depends on very specific triggering conditions. Professor Nakamura began, his voice measured as he addressed the military delegation. After analyzing every case we could find, we've concluded that only direct close-quarters combat with demons and monsters, especially fights fought with cold weapons or bare hands, seems capable of jolting someone's latent potential and igniting their spiritual power. He paused, letting the officers absorb the implication. And of course, we need say nothing more about the Busujima family. Their daughter, blessed or perhaps chosen by that terrestrial deity, has provided us with a wealth of behavioral data simply by virtue of her existence. A tall general, his dress uniform gleaming with stars on the shoulder straps, frowned and leaned forward. "With all due respect, Professor, our own army has engaged demons and monsters in face-to-face combat countless times, yet we have never recorded a single instance of spiritual awakening among our soldiers. And the international mercenaries, some of their elite operatives, have decades of monster-slaying experience. How is it that none of them show any sign of awakening either?" The professor nodded, acknowledging the objection. "That's precisely the issue we anticipated. We've held extensive internal discussions on this point." Ethan sat at the head of the long conference table, watching as Colonel Takahashi flipped through the latest field reports. Around him, military strategists and martial arts masters leaned in, eager to hear the assessment. "All right," Colonel Takahashi began, setting the papers aside. "Looking at the Busujima family's records and the experiences of our martial arts operatives, we can say one thing for certain. Thermal weapons, while devastating at range, won't trigger the spiritual awakening we need." He met Ethan's eyes. "Yes, lasers and plasma cannons can wipe out demons and monsters from afar, but they don't place our fighters under the kind of primal stress required to unlock their hidden potential." Dr. Saito chimed in. "Spiritual awakening isn't a technical phenomenon. It's instinctive. It happens when a person confronts true, up-close danger. Historically, it's only shown up in battles fought with cold steel or in bare-knuckle combat. That life-or-death clash, when you feel your own heartbeat thundering in your ears, jolts something deep inside you." He paused to let the room absorb his words. "We've even seen practitioners who drop their swords and fight unarmed, yet still awaken their spiritual power. The common thread isn't the weapon itself, but the intensity of the struggle and the survivor's instinct kicking in. That extreme edge, when you believe you might die, is what unlocks the unknown force within." A low murmur ran through the assembly. Ethan felt a ripple of tension. If his team was to stand any chance against the hordes of monsters gathering beyond the city walls, they would have to engage at point-blank range, and that meant risking everything, body, mind, and soul, to awaken the power they so desperately needed. The room fell silent as the assembled magnates exchanged uneasy glances. Shock and doubt were written on every face. They had come here with all the confidence that wealth and influence could buy, accustomed to a life far removed from any genuine struggle for survival. And now they sat before a proposal so drastic that it threatened to upend everything they knew about power. If this is truly what it takes to awaken spiritual power, one burly, sleek-haired tycoon whispered, his voice quivering, then how on earth are we supposed to accept it? His eyes flicked from side to side, a mixture of fear and indignation lurking behind his carefully cultivated swagger. In a world bristling with unseen dangers, spiritual abilities promised a decisive edge, a shortcut to supremacy. Yet the price the data suggested seemed almost barbaric. The men and women around the long conference table had spent their lives trading in safer currencies, influence, finance, political favors. A demand like this felt utterly alien. Dr. Sofia Ramirez, chief scientist of the research team, watched them with calm resolve. She had anticipated resistance, but she also knew, and her carefully calibrated charts and measurements proved that there were no shortcuts in the realm of true discovery. Gently, she tapped the edge of the data tablet before her. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her tone even and authoritative, "I know this sounds beyond belief, but our instruments don't lie. Every trial, every repetition has yielded the same chilling conclusion. To trigger spiritual resonance, one must confront this sacrifice. I'm fully aware of the magnitude of what I'm asking. Nevertheless, no advancement of this magnitude ever comes without a price." A stunned hush fell over the room. Outside, the wind howled against the reinforced glass, as though the world itself were questioning their next move. And inside, power brokers and visionaries alike realized that, for the first time, their greatest asset, life itself, might be the only cost worth paying. Ethan clicked the remote, and the giant screen behind him lit up with stark statistics. "We've deployed massive forces, international mercenaries included, and fought countless battles against monsters. Our casualty count has already topped 100,000, yet not one soldier has awakened any spiritual power. That single fact proves conventional arms have no effect on spiritual awakening." The screen shifted to a scrolling montage of battlefield horrors, shattered helmets, mangled armor, rivers of blood staining frozen landscapes. Not once did the camera linger on anyone manifesting spiritual energy. Ethan let the images play out before pressing on. By contrast, the Boussuard family and a handful of our finest martial artists, though numerically far smaller, have repeatedly triggered their spiritual potential at the brink of death. These awakened fighters shrug off ordinary bullets, their physical strength shattering every limit of the human body. They've become true superhumans. A hush fell over the room before murmurs began to ripple through the assembled officers. Wolf level, E level, Goblin level. To them, these classifications were more than mere ranks. They were a promise of power beyond mortal reach, a ticket to security and influence in an increasingly hostile world. Ethan cleared his throat and tapped at the projection screen. "Data are objective," he began. "They neither lie nor require extra controls to prove their worth. In a battle where life and death hang in the balance, those who can awaken their spiritual power demonstrate their superiority through action alone." A hush fell over the conference room. The assembled leaders exchanged glances, each lost in his own thoughts. Some weighed the risks, debating whether the potential gain justified the danger. Others remembered their younger days, when courage and strength came easily, and wondered if they still had that fire within. A few quietly schemed, trying to find a safer path to ignite their own spiritual abilities. Yet despite their private doubts and schemes, one truth loomed larger than any fear. In a world brimming with unknown threats, only those bold enough to face a true life-or-death trial can claim real power. Awakening one's spiritual force might well be the final and most brutal test on that road. Ethan leaned forward, voice low but steady. "This is completely insane. But there's no denying the truth. Awakening one's spiritual power is inseparable from life and death struggle. The Dushima clan, and every martial artist who's managed it, did so because they were willing to risk everything, to stare down demons and monsters in a fight to the finish. Now, the world's ruling elite sense that the next great upheaval could topple them from their thrones. They've never faced true mortal peril, and so they'll never unlock spiritual power or become the superhumans they so envy. Chapter 1146, New Tokyo City. The clear bell-like voice rang out in the vast, solemn hall of the Tiangong Temple. It carried a poise and maturity beyond the usual reaches of youth. Before Ethan, hailed across the world as the god of the world, knelt a purple-haired beauty, Saiko Busujima. In her perfectly folded Yamato Nadeshiko posture, her silken hair cascaded like a waterfall, each strand catching the temple's soft light. Her large, liquid eyes brimmed with unspoken urgency and hope. "My father has awakened his spiritual power," Saiko announced, her voice quivering. "But in doing so, he lost an arm. Master, I beg you, please help him." She twisted the silk edges of her kimono, knuckles whitening with tension. Ethan studied her calmly, compassion softening his usually impassive gaze. After a heartbeat's pause, he inclined his head. "It's not impossible." His quiet assurance sent a spark of relief and surprise flickering across Seiko's face. To Ethan, restoring Shinichiro Busujima's severed limb was no more than a minor feat of spiritual mastery. As sunlight broke through the temple's high windows, illuminating the two of them, hope blossomed in Seiko's eyes. The fate of the Busujima patriarch now rested in Ethan's capable hands, and soon the world would witness the true extent of his power. "Thank you, Master." Her voice brimmed with gratitude as she rose and crossed the room toward Ethan. In that simple stride, every aspect of her form, her slender waist, long legs, and supple curves, was on full display. The fabric of her uniform clung to the toned strength she'd honed through years of martial arts training, tracing every graceful line and leaving Ethan's eyes riveted. He couldn't help but notice the quiet pride in Busujima Seiko's posture, the way she carried herself with both confidence and a subtle deference toward him. There was something in her gaze, too, a flash of desire mixed with trust that set his pulse racing. As his attention lingered, Saiko lowered her eyes, the faint curve of her chest and hips becoming apparent beneath her clothes. A warm flush tinted her cheeks at the realization, but she steadied herself in an instant. With effortless composure, she settled beside Ethan as though nothing at all had happened. Her purple hair slipped over her shoulders, and a gentle, floral scent wafted in the air between them, leaving the room charged with an unspoken promise. A soft, almost enchanting smile curved Saiko Busujima's lips, so warm and inviting it could melt the iciest heart. Ethan felt the gentle heat of her body, an almost irresistible allure, but he wasn't a man easily swayed by mere beauty. With quiet confidence, he slipped his arms around Saiko's slender waist, drawing her close. Beneath his touch, her skin felt smooth and flawless, her unique fragrance filling his senses. The intimacy of the moment only confirmed his conviction. For a heartbeat, Saiko's body stiffened, then relaxed as she realized Ethan's embrace was his way of accepting her. Her fingers braided together on his back, and she looked up at him with misty, hopeful eyes. In that glance, her thoughts bloomed with vivid dreams of what their future together might hold, each one more beautiful than the last. Ethan gazed down at her. Since her purification and spiritual awakening, every inch of Saiko seemed to glow with a transcendent light, an ethereal beauty far beyond the mortal realm. Under the moonlight, her skin looked as if it had been carved from the finest porcelain, flawless, luminous. Her eyes, warm as a spring brook, shimmered and rippled with emotion, each gentle movement brushing against Ethan's heart and stirring waves of wonder. Every time her lashes fluttered, it felt like the world paused to admire a masterpiece. Ethan's pulse quickened, a surge of fascination more powerful than any connection he had ever known. He cupped Saiko Dokujima in his arms, careful not to shatter this rare moment of perfect stillness and beauty. "Master!" Seiko's voice was soft and clear, like a distant star glowing in the night sky. Remote, yet impossibly bright. A hint of shyness and anticipation laced her words, as though she were both testing him and inviting him closer. Ethan could sense the depth of her feeling in that single whispered syllable, complete trust, profound attachment, and a yearning that bound her spirit to his. Night had fallen into a hushed stillness, as if the very air around them had stilled. The moonlight cast everything in silvery tones, stripping the world of color and sound until only Ethan and Saiko Busujima remained, suspended in a moment of perfect calm. There was an indescribable fragrance drifting on the breeze, Seiko's own subtle perfume, fresh and refined, soothing Ethan's senses and filling him with a gentle joy. He stood there, captivated, when Seiko stirred. She drew a steadying breath and, summoning her courage, took a single step toward him. Then another, each footfall careful and deliberate, as though she feared disturbing this rare serenity. Ethan could feel the warmth radiating from her, the gentle pulse of life that made him inexplicably at peace. As she closed the distance, their shadows merged on the ground, and in that mingling of light and dark, it felt as though their hearts might merge too. He caught the soft rise and fall of her breath, and each exhale carried her delicate perfume, setting his pulse racing with sudden urgency. Seiko paused just inches away. Neither spoke. There was no need. In that charged silence, she found what she'd wanted most, a moment of closeness and mutual understanding. Then, with a small, triumphant smile, she revealed she'd succeeded in drawing from Ethan the very thing she'd come to claim, a single vial of the precious potion he carried. Ethan held out his hand, and golden ripples shimmered into existence before him. From that luminous haze, he withdrew a small vial of iridescent potion. "Give this to your father," he said quietly. "Once he drinks it, his fractured arm will mend on its own." Seiko Busujima accepted the vial with trembling fingers, her eyes wide with both relief and astonishment. "Thank you, master," she whispered. Ever since Shinichiro Busujima awoke his spiritual power, he had set about transforming the entire Busujima clan. He completely redesigned their training regimen and infused the family's age-old traditions with modern management concepts. In just a few months, the Busujimas had recaptured and even surpassed their former glory. Shinichiro didn't stop there. He hired a top-tier construction firm to build them a new residence beneath the Tengu Shrine. The mansion's soaring facade and decadent interiors, every opulent detail hinting at both refined taste and formidable strength, quickly became the talk of Tokyo. Jealous eyes followed the Busujima's every move, longing for the same divine protection the Tengu Shrine now bestowed on them. Yet the threshold of the Tengu Shrine remained fiercely guarded. Only the most worthy, those who could prove themselves both disciplined and devoted, stood a chance of crossing it. And for everyone else, it was nothing more than an unreachable dream. Only 3 fortunate families, the Busujima, the Hiratsuka, and the Kasumigaoka, were ever able to establish themselves beneath the Tengu Temple, basking in its unrivaled honor and peace. Chapter 1147, Shifts in Spiritual Power. Word of the Tiangong Temple's existence spread quickly throughout Tokyo's shattered landscape, marking it as a newfound focal point of safety and hope. Wherever the ravages of war and the encroachment of demons had driven people from their homes, rumors of the temple's protective aura drew them in. Even ghosts and malevolent spirits, normally drawn to fear and suffering, seemed to sense a barrier around the temple grounds and steered clear. Within weeks, hundreds of refugees, families uprooted by conflict, travelers fleeing demon hordes, gathered on the temple's outskirts. Grateful to escape the chaos, they erected simple huts and shacks, forming a burgeoning community that clustered around Tiangong's ancient walls. Fires glowed at night, laughter echoed between prayer ceremonies, and for the first time in months, many dared to dream of stability. Watching this transformation, the island's provisional government moved swiftly. They announced the New Tokyo City Reconstruction Initiative, a bold plan to restore order, reinvigorate commerce, and harness the temple's unique spiritual energy to fortify the region. Under New Tokyo City's banner, engineers surveyed the makeshift settlements, architects drafted blueprints for market squares and sturdy dwellings, city planners mapped out fortified walls and clean water systems. Most importantly, the government pledged to protect Tiangong Temple as the heart of this revival. They stationed patrols along its perimeter to keep demonic forces at bay and established training grounds for spirit guardians, men and women who would learn to channel the temple's power in defense of the city. As reconstruction began in earnest, the people's faith in a brighter future solidified. In the shadow of Tiangong's spires, New Tokyo City took shape, a testament to human resilience, the miracle of spiritual protection, and the unyielding hope that even in the darkest times, life can begin anew. In the master plan for New Tokyo City, the Tiangong Temple sits at the very heart of the metropolis. Around it, planners have laid out carefully balanced commercial districts, residential neighborhoods, educational campuses, and green belts, each zone harmonizing with the temple's presence. Land values climb dramatically the closer you get to the temple's central precinct. That premium isn't just due to the heightened security guaranteed in this sacred core, but also to the temple's fabled aura, which many believe imbues the surrounding area with a special, almost mystical energy. As a result, property here has long since outpriced ordinary real estate markets, drawing interest and deep pockets from investors around the globe. Every plot seems to promise limitless potential, whether envisioned as a bustling business hub or a tranquil home. In New Tokyo, every inch of land is worth its weight in gold isn't an exaggeration. It's simply the cost of proximity to the legendary Tiangong Temple. Demons and restless spirits have grown bolder in recent weeks. No longer content to skulk in shadowy alleys, they now openly defy humanity's order. Outside Tokyo, once bustling cities like Kyoto and Osaka bear fresh scars of their onslaught. Unholy footprints in deserted streets, glimpses of fiendish silhouettes under the cover of night, and the occasional outbreak of chaos that sends ordinary people scrambling for safety. By dusk, shopfronts shudder and thoroughfares fall eerily silent, broken only by distant sirens wailing through the darkness. Faced with this mounting terror, many residents have abandoned the cities entirely, some fleeing to remote mountain villages, others seeking asylum overseas. Yet an even larger number have chosen to stay in Tokyo, clustering around the venerable Tiangu Temple. Here, they believe, lies their final refuge. The island's government, overwhelmed by a threat it cannot contain, has tried everything: airstrikes, specialized weaponry, cutting-edge research programs, but with negligible success. At last, they conceded that conventional forces are powerless against these supernatural assailants. Desperate, they have turned to the Tiangu Temple and its mysterious master as the last bulwark standing between Tokyo and total collapse. The government established a network of safe zones radiating outward from the Tiangu Temple, havens not only in the city's streets, but in people's hearts. Tokyo's economic stability now depended on the temple's magnetic pull. Investors and tourists were drawn by its promise of sanctuary, helping to offset the downturn caused by the demon threat. Then Ghidorah appeared. This legendary three-headed behemoth, a living force of destruction, laid waste to even America's most advanced naval fleet in an instant. The world watched in horror as the Titan demonstrated just how powerless humanity could be in the face of such raw devastation. In the aftermath, governments everywhere realized that sheer military might would never suffice. Planes from across the globe descended on Tokyo, carrying politicians, scientists, explorers, and ordinary citizens, each determined to unlock the secrets of the Tiangu Temple and find some way to stand against the demons that threaten them all. Ethan Busujima stood in the quiet stillness of his courtyard, his gaze fixed on the jade steps that hovered before the Tiangu Temple. He had stared at those suspended stairs countless times, each glance fueling his longing to tread where no ordinary mortal dared. To Ethan, they were more than steps. They were the very embodiment of power and authority, the unmistakable proof of the temple master's unrivaled status. Legend said an invisible barrier surrounded the staircase, gently but firmly repelling anyone who ventured too close without the master's leave. Today, his daughter Psycho emerged from that forbidden realm, descending the steps with measured grace. Every time she returned, Ethan's chest swelled with pride. Through her, he felt a connection to that exalted world, one he had only ever dreamed of entering. Psycho's training and favor with the master of Tiangu Temple had become his lifeline to possibilities previously beyond reach. "Father," Psycho said, lifting a small jade vial from the folds of her robe, "the master insisted I give you this. Drink it, and your injured arm will heal completely." Ethan accepted the vial with trembling fingers. He recognized in this gift more than a simple remedy. It was a token of the master's protection, and a profound gesture of trust. With unwavering gratitude, he prepared to take the elixir that might restore him to full strength. Chapter 12. Awakening the Spirit. Ethan Busujima steadied himself and took a deep breath before downing the jade vial of elixir in a single gulp. Almost instantly, a warm, pulsating energy coursed through his veins. He watched in stunned disbelief as the fractures in his arm mended themselves, the flesh knitting together until his limb was whole once more. "My arm! It's healed!" Ethan exclaimed, flexing his fingers. Relief and exhilaration washed over him. He had feared he'd lost it forever in the last battle, but now, miraculously, it was restored. Standing nearby, his daughter Saiko's eyes shone with pride and curiosity. "Father, what comes next? Will you finally begin learning the spiritual cultivation method?" Ethan nodded, a broad smile lifting the weariness from his face. "Yes, Master Ren has granted me permission to start. It's far safer and far more efficient than our old techniques." Seiko's brow furrowed as she fell into step beside him. Something about her gait looked off, and Ethan recognized the telltale tension in her shoulders. A fleeting worry crossed his mind. Had she overexerted herself in training? But before he could ask, Seiko spoke again, her voice bright with anticipation. "Tell me more about changing the nature of spiritual power. What does that involve?" Ethan stopped at the garden's edge, the late afternoon sun gilding the cherry blossoms overhead. He placed a reassuring hand on Seiko's shoulder. "Spiritual cultivation isn't just about harnessing energy. It's about transforming its very essence, aligning your spirit with your chosen element so that your power flows stronger, more controlled, and without the risk of backlash." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Once you've reshaped your spiritual core, your abilities will grow exponentially. Your defenses will become as resilient as steel, and your attacks will strike with the force of a tempest." Seiko's eyes widened. For a moment, father and daughter stood in silence, each contemplating the trials ahead. Then she squared her shoulders and offered him a determined grin. "Then let's begin," she said, "together." Ethan returned her smile, pride swelling in his chest. "Together," he agreed. And as they stepped forward toward the temple's training hall, a new chapter in their journey was about to unfold, one of spirit, strength, and unbreakable family bonds. Spiritual power can alter its elemental nature to produce unique effects when it contacts objects. For example, by adopting the fire attribute, it ignites whatever it touches, generating intense heat and roaring flames. In essence, it lets you infuse your attacks with fiery power. That, in a nutshell, is the fire nature of spiritual power, Saiko Busujima said, her tone calm but confident. Across from her, Shinichiro Busujima leaned forward, eyes shining with excitement. He'd never imagined spiritual power could shift so fluidly, like a living force drawn from the purest elements of nature and guided by the user's will. Chapter 1148, The Excellence of Yamato Nadeshiko. The transformations of spiritual power are as varied and subtle as the shifting weather between heaven and earth. Busujima Saiko stood in the courtyard, a gentle breeze lifting her long, silky hair and lending her an almost otherworldly grace. The five elements, metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, are the fundamental forces that shape our world. Metal embodies hardness and precision, like the unyielding bones of mountains and rivers. It is truly indestructible. Wood symbolizes growth and renewal, the vibrant green life of spring. Water represents adaptability and flow, coursing through rivers, lakes, and seas, reaching everywhere. Fire signifies passion and destruction, like the scorching sun that can both warm and consume. Earth stands for stability and nourishment, the maternal ground that supports and nurtures all living things. These elements work together and counterbalance one another, forming the very fabric of reality. Chapter title: The Fundamental Law of All Things. Ethan knelt in the center of the circular chamber, runes etched into the stone floor glowing with a pale, pulsating light. Before him stood Busujima Saiko, her presence serene yet commanding. Above her palms swirled 5 distinct streams of elemental energy: wind, rain, thunder, lightning, and ice. With a clear, resonant voice, Saiko spoke, "This is the fundamental law of all things." Her words seemed to give form to the unseen, turning abstract concepts into living forces that danced in the air. A knowing gleam shone in her eyes as she explained, "These natural phenomena, wind, rain, thunder, lightning, and ice, are the highest expressions of the 5 elemental powers." She raised her hand, and the wind around them roared to life, carrying droplets of water that hovered in midair. Thunder rumbled so deeply that the chamber trembled, while jagged forks of lightning flashed and dissolved into arcs of blue-white light. At her fingertips, crystalline shards of ice formed and drifted like frozen stars. Wind is formless, yet unstoppable, capable of moving mountains. Rain nourishes the earth and awakens every seed. Thunder shakes the heart with its primal roar. Lightning is swift and precise, cleaving darkness in an instant. Ice embodies stillness, crystallizing the moment and holding it suspended in time. Ethan watched, wide-eyed, as each element pulsed with power. Psycho then lowered her arms, the elemental display fading into the ambient glow of the runes. Her tone grew more contemplative. Beyond these manifestations lies an even deeper principle. Yin and yang, life and death. They are the heavenly path that governs all existence. In perfect balance, yin and yang foster growth. In their tension, they reveal the cycle of mortality. Life is as glorious as summer blossoms, and death is as tranquil as autumn leaves drifting to rest. Her gaze turned solemn as she spoke of a darker aspect of nature. Poison, too, is part of this grand balance. It is nature's bias, neither wholly good nor evil. In skilled hands, a poison can heal, sealing wounds and driving out disease. In untrained hands, it destroys without mercy. Psycho paused, letting her words hang in the charged air. Then she stepped back, folding her arms as the echoes of thunder and lightning faded. To master these forces, wind, rain, thunder, lightning, ice, and even poison, you must understand their place in the great tapestry of yin and yang. Only then can you wield them with wisdom, rather than being consumed by their power. Ethan drew in a slow breath, the weight of her lesson settling in his mind. As the chamber's runes dimmed to a steady glow, he rose to his feet, his resolve crystallized like the ice that had once danced at Seiko's fingertips. Each of these elemental shifts is so profound that one could spend a lifetime exploring its depths. Ethan listened in silent awe, his eyes wide with wonder. He'd never imagined that spiritual power could be this rich and varied. Every change in the element seemed to swing open a door to a new realm, deepening his grasp of the world's hidden forces. You mentioned that most people can master only a single element in their lifetime, he said, voice tinged with both curiosity and reverence. So those who command two must be extraordinarily rare. Psycho gave a measured nod. The katana in her hand gleamed with a faint golden light as she replied. Exactly. Anyone who masters two or more elements immediately earns a place in legend. Take Abe Seimei, for example. He was an onmyoji unparalleled in his day, bending wind, rain, thunder, and lightning to his will, and even conversing with spirits and deities. Or consider Minamoto no Yorimitsu, who single-handedly vanquished 4 fearsome monsters. Ethan absorbed her words, feeling the weight of history settle around him. If such feats were possible, what might he achieve with enough dedication and skill? Ethan watched in awe as Psycho's swordsmanship and spiritual power unfolded before him. Proof that true mastery comes from perfect control. By channeling the shifting forces of nature, she pushed her abilities to their absolute limit. Her every movement was fluid and precise, as though each gesture carried its own hidden rhythm and strength. With deliberate calm, Saiko drew her katana from its scabbard. At first glance, the blade looked unremarkable, but Ethan felt a tremor of anticipation in the air. The moment the sword slid free, a deep, dragon-like growl seemed to roll out from the steel itself, a whisper of pride and the sheer will to fight. Under the moonlight, the blade's surface shimmered with a pale, frosty glow. Then Psycho closed her eyes and poured her spiritual energy into the metal. In an instant, that subtle chill exploded into a brilliant radiance, as if the sword could slice through shadow itself. The edge gleamed so brightly it stole Ethan's breath away. No longer mere cold steel, the katana had become a living extension of its wielder. It vibrated in Psycho's hand, each tiny quiver announcing the raw power coiled at its tip, eager to be unleashed. Tiny fissures rippled through the air, silent scars left by the sword's energy, testaments to the extraordinary power Psycho wielded. She offered an explanation. I chose the metal spirit transformation not because it's the strongest, but because it suits me best. As the daughter of a martial arts family, I prize speed and raw power above all. Metal grants both. It hardens my blade and my body into something sharp, unyielding, and nearly indestructible. She paused, eyes thoughtful. Of course, metal has its weaknesses. It's vulnerable to fire, which can melt it away, and to lightning, which it conducts all too well, turning strength into sudden, catastrophic damage. Ethan listened carefully, frowning as he weighed her words. In this world where spirit power defines one's prowess, every elemental transformation carries its own advantages and drawbacks. Mastery lies not in perfection, but in knowing how and when to exploit your element. Seiko's confidence showed she'd already made her choice. That, he said at last, is the true allure of spirit combat. They complement and restrain each other endlessly, Seiko declared, her voice brimming with pride in the spiritual path she had chosen. Her father, Busujima Shinichiro, watched his daughter's confident gaze and felt a surge of pride. Indeed, he agreed, folding his hands behind his back. Mastering spiritual cultivation is crucial above all else. Seiko's expression grew earnest. Father, please be cautious. Don't teach this method privately to anyone, not even our closest relatives or fellow students in the dojo. No one may learn it without the headmaster's explicit permission. A complex flicker of emotion passed through her eyes as she spoke. Though Seiko still served Ethan in the guise of a maid, her heart had long since belonged to him. Her loyalty transcended her station. It was a bond woven from devotion and respect. As the rightful heir of the Yamato Nadeshiko tradition, she understood the importance of safeguarding her husband's family. This was her pledge to Ethan, and also a tribute to her own heritage. At her words, Shinichiro's stern features softened into a warm, proud smile. Ethan watched his daughter with a gentle smile, realizing she was no longer the little girl who needed his constant protection. He laid a reassuring hand on Seiko's shoulder, pride and relief shining in his eyes. I understand, Seiko. You've grown into your own person, with your own judgment and choices, and I respect that. I always knew you'd become an exceptional young woman, worthy of the name Yamato Nadeshiko. I suspected a day like this would come. He also knew that in this world, no father or god on earth could tolerate his daughter growing too close to outsiders, even her own family. Only by demonstrating absolute loyalty and dedication to Ethan could Seiko truly earn his favor. Shinichiro Bushima, still intrigued by the subject, couldn't contain his curiosity. What about your spiritual power? How has its form changed? Chapter 1149, Kasumigaoka Utaha and Hirazuka Shizuka Busujima. Seiko smiled as she began her explanation. Shaping spiritual power into different forms is an advanced technique. It requires not only understanding the essence of your own spiritual energy, but also exercising precise control over its outward manifestation. For instance, she continued, when you mold fiery spiritual power into a wall of flame, you must carefully regulate the flow of energy. That ensures the barrier remains stable and solid, while you manage the heat and reach of the blaze, so you neither harm yourself nor squander your power. And summoning a fire phoenix, she said, her eyes gleaming, that's the ultimate test of both your spirit and your mind. Each feather, each wing beat must be crafted with fine-tuned spiritual control, and you have to predict every twist and turn of its flight. Only then can it soar across the battlefield like a living creature, striking targets at a distance and evading counterattacks with remarkable agility. Think of straightforward assaults as uncut jade, Seiko concluded. Pure, yes, but lacking in nuance and strategy. Kasumigaoka Utaha nodded thoughtfully, while Hirazuka Shizuka crossed her arms, the wheels of her mind clearly turning as they prepared to master this next level of power. By changing the very form of spiritual energy, Seiko Busujima explained at last, we open it up to infinite possibilities. Every strike can become a complete surprise to the opponent. Shinichiro Dushima listened closely to his daughter's words, an expression of sudden clarity lighting his eyes. He had long believed that mastering the fundamental properties of spiritual energy was the pinnacle of cultivation. He never imagined there might be such profound variations in form, still waiting to be discovered. With a thoughtful sigh, he admitted, I see now, spiritual energy runs far deeper than I ever guessed. We have much more to learn if we hope to uncover its true potential. Compared to the scattered spirit users and demons roaming unchecked, Shinichiro knew that the Dushima family already held a years-long lead. How long it would take their rivals to recognize and exploit these shifts in energy form was anyone's guess. And he had no intention of sharing their methods. Far too many eyes were already fixed on the Dushimas. Ethan worried that if his disciples or family members were tempted, or inadvertently overheard and stole, his method for cultivating spiritual power, the secret would be exposed. Such a leak would damage his daughter's standing before the god of the world and, by extension, jeopardize the Dushima family's entire legacy. He knew he had to guard this knowledge with utmost care. Meanwhile, in a secluded courtyard, Kasumigaoka Utaha sat cross-legged on a silken cushion, eyes closed and breathing steadily as faint ripples of spiritual energy pulsed around her. She was well aware that her combat skills fell short of those of Seiko Busujima and Shizuka Hiratsuka, yet she refused to be disheartened. Ethan's advice had pointed her toward an alternative path to power. Now, she was attempting to channel her spiritual energy into living creatures, gently warming and strengthening them, in hopes of cultivating her very own Shikigami, a summoning beast. The process tested her patience and resolve. She had to infuse her power bit by bit, forging a deep, symbiotic bond with each animal she chose. He had to patiently and carefully gauge each animal's response, modulating his spiritual energy so they could smoothly absorb and integrate it. These beings, born of pure spirit power, were exceptionally loyal and formidable, obeying their master's will, and in rare moments, even channeling strength that surpassed his own. Unlike demons or ghosts, Shikigami and summoned beasts drew on spiritual energy rather than demonic force, making them natural allies to a psychic. Ethan Kasumigaoka knelt beside the small puppy he'd chosen as his Shikigami candidate and gently stroked its soft fur. "You can do this, little one," he whispered, his voice warm with encouragement. Then he closed his eyes and let his spirit power flow. Bit by bit, he wove his energy into the pup's essence, careful to maintain a steady, reassuring current. The awakening was slow but unwavering. With each pulse of power, the puppy's eyes grew brighter and its body more vigorous. Under Ethan's meticulous cultivation, faint ripples of spiritual energy began to dance along its form, and subtle new abilities flickered to life in its movements. Soon, this loyal companion would stand fully awakened, a true Shikigami, ready to fight by Ethan's side and prove the worth of his patient care. Kasumigaoka Shiyu had a very deliberate reason for choosing a dog as her first Shikigami. To her, dogs epitomized loyalty and courage, qualities she prized above all. Cats, in contrast, struck her as aloof and self-possessed, difficult to befriend, and even harder to form the deep, trusting bond she sought. A dog, she believed, would stand by her side without question, guarding her with fierce devotion. "Woof! Woof!" The little pup barked eagerly, its tail whipping in excitement. It was clear already that this Shikigami had power beyond its size. Even Shizuka Hiratsuka, renowned for both her skill in combat and her fierce reputation, admitted that the puppy could give her a run for her money. And that was saying something. Shizuka had always been a force in the field, but since awakening her own spiritual power, she'd become even more formidable. Shizuka's element was lightning. She could enshroud her fists in crackling thunder and unleash what she called her thunder fist technique. The bolts she summoned struck with brutal penetration, capable of paralyzing anyone they hit and even frying mechanical constructs in an instant. Lightning, after all, was uniquely adept at overloading circuits and nerves alike. Under its influence, Shizuka's reflexes sharpened and her speed surged, making her almost untouchable in close quarters. Of course, all that raw power came at a cost. Her spiritual reserves weren't yet sufficient to sustain the full force of her storm indefinitely. Each thunder-charged blow left her drained, and despite her growing strength, she still needed to pace herself. As she watched Shiyu call forth her loyal new companion, Shizuka couldn't help but smile. There was more to this battle than simple brawn. Trust and unity, it seemed, would play just as vital a role. Once her energy reserves peak, she can cloak her entire body in crackling thunder spirit power, boosting both her speed and her destructive force to astonishing levels. Shizuka Hiratsuka stood amid the ruins before her. Tokyo's once vibrant streets, now nothing more than twisted steel and shattered concrete. This city, long a beacon of prosperity, had become a hunting ground for demons and foul beasts. Swaths of land lay too dangerous to rebuild, fenced off with barbed wire, as grim warnings to anyone who might stray too close. The arrival of the Tiangong Temple had brought a glimmer of hope, but with it came a dramatic shift in the city's very structure. Areas bathed in the temple's mysterious aura became refuges of relative safety, while districts farther out devolved into demon-infested wastelands. Kasumigaoka Shiyu felt the weight of her duty settle on her shoulders. Determined to prepare for the growing threats, she resolved to take her recently adopted pup into real combat training. Steeling herself, Shiyu sprinted forward. In a graceful arc, she vaulted over the 2-meter-high fence as if it weren't there, landing lightly on the other side. Ahead lay the wasteland, dark, dangerous, but necessary terrain if both she and her new companion were to survive what came next. Ethan watched Utaha move with the grace of an elf, weaving effortlessly through the tangled undergrowth. A breeze trailed at her heels. She might not have possessed the light-footedness of Shiyu Kasumigaoka, but her combination of explosive strength and nimble agility let her vault over the wire mesh without breaking stride. When Ethan stepped into the ruins himself, a rancid gust of air struck him full in the face. Half-collapsed walls and crumbling structures rose like tombstones, silent witnesses to a forgotten glory now claimed by decay. The stench of rotting demon flesh mingled with the faint, despairing cries of the few humans still trapped inside. Utaha's brow tightened as she swept the desolate courtyard with sharp, watchful eyes. Every muscle in her body tensed, ready for whatever horrors might lurk behind those shattered walls. Chapter 1150, Kasumigaoka Utaha's Gale. A moment later, a colossal spider crept into view, its size rivaling that of a king crab. 8 thick, articulated legs braced its massive body, and its black carapace shimmered with a metallic sheen. 2 ruby-red eyes, glowing like lanterns, fixed greedily on the intruders. Utaha Kasumigaoka and her companion, Hayate. Hayate let out a low, resonant growl. Bathed in Utaha's spiritual power, the once frail pup had transformed. His muscles coiled, every sinew primed to unleash extraordinary strength. Utaha reached down, gently ruffling his fur, and whispered, "Hai Feng, now." Her voice brimmed with unwavering confidence. Responding instantly, Hayate sprang forward, his paws digging into the earth like the drawing of a bowstring. In a heartbeat, he vaulted dozens of meters into the air, tracing a graceful arc as he hurtled straight toward the spider's waiting jaws. The giant spider froze in shock at the sudden assault, flailing its jointed legs in a frantic attempt to defend itself. But before it could react, Ethan's companion, Gale, struck with blinding speed. Like a streak of lightning, Gale's razor-sharp fangs ripped into the spider's chitinous carapace, sending a geyser of dark blood spraying into the air. A high-pitched scream tore from the spider's mandibles as it thrashed its 8 legs, trying desperately to shake its attacker loose. Gale, however, refused to relent. Its powerful jaws clamped down again and again, each bite driving deeper into the armored shell. With a sickening crack, one of the spider's legs was torn free and fell to the ground in a spatter of crimson. Blood ran over Gale's muzzle and dripped from its nose, but the beast paid no heed to its own wounds. Eyes blazing, it redoubled its fury, teeth glinting as it shredded the monster's defenses. The spider, despite its massive size and extraordinary strength, was utterly overwhelmed by Gale's storm-like onslaught. Standing a short distance away, Kasumigaoka Shiyu watched the gruesome spectacle in tense silence. Worry and excitement warred behind her gaze as she silently urged Ethan and Gale toward a swift victory. She bit her lip, anxiously watching Hayate. A spider that size was never to be underestimated, but she'd put her faith in him, confident he would prove her right. Clenching her fists, she silently cheered him on. With each gust of wind, Hayate's wounds grew more grievous. Several of his 8-jointed legs had been torn off by the gale. The few that remained trembled helplessly. His great, glossy carapace began to dull and shrink, like a fallen titan on its last breath. Sensing victory, Gale struck. He sank his teeth into Hayate's head, the creature's most vulnerable point, and shook violently, intent on ripping it away. Hayate shrieked in agony as dark ichor spurted across the stone floor, his wound gushing blood like a broken fountain. The final gust of wind slammed him against the ground, and at last he curled into a helpless, motionless ball. The battle was over. A sudden roar of wind filled the air, brimming with raw, untamed power. In the next instant, Shiyu Kasumigaoka watched Ethan inhale sharply, then release a visible jet of air from his mouth. The gust slammed into the giant spider like an arrow loosed from a masterful bow. There was a deafening crack, an explosive shockwave that rattled everything nearby. Dust and debris spiraled into a chaotic fog as the spider's body bulged and then burst apart. flesh and chitin shredded into countless fragments, splattering the ground in a grisly storm of gore. Boom! Shiyu stared in stunned exhilaration. She'd never imagined Ethan could manifest spiritual power, let alone an elemental attribute. His wind technique was devastating, its force rivaling, even surpassing, a high-explosive grenade. All the hours she devoted to infusing him with spiritual energy had paid off in spectacular fashion. Chapter 6-9 Bookbar. Woof! Woof! A pair of sharp barks cut through the charged air. The redirected blast slammed into Shiyu Kasumigaoka's feet, but she was ready. Drawing on her spiritual power, she wove a sphere of water around herself, letting the gale-driven torrent rinse away blood and grime. Such an extravagant use of energy for a simple cleansing was unheard of. No other martial artist would dare squander precious spiritual reserves that way. As the wind subsided and the last droplets scattered, Shiyu braced herself for whatever came next. Ethan watched her from the edge of the courtyard, remembering their earlier conversation. "By your reckoning, Gale should be goblin level now, right?" he asked. Shiyu exhaled, her brows knitting together. "Our grading system is crude. If you can't be harmed by bullets, you're roughly goblin level. If artillery shells can't touch you, you're around skeleton soldier status. And it's not just about how many wounds you can take, it's whether you can dodge or absorb a hit without slowing down. Until you see someone in a real fight, you can't pin down their true strength." Ethan turned his gaze toward Tokyo's skyline. A heavy, unnatural gloom hung over the city, born of fear and uncertainty. In that darkness, even the strongest warriors felt a chill. After the threat posed by demon power became public knowledge, those once fascinating creatures, demons and monsters alike, went from celebrated curiosities to pariahs overnight. Their market value fell below that of discarded chicken bones. A sudden shift in public opinion turned them from exotic attractions into urgent hazards that had to be eradicated. Even the United States, long proud of its military might, abruptly pulled its forces out of Tokyo, treating the demon crisis like an uncontrollable catastrophe. Following America's lead, scores of international mercenaries, many seasoned combat veterans, also retreated. Not even generous paychecks could overcome their fear of the unknown. In no time, Tokyo's defenses were decimated, leaving only Japan's self-defense forces and local police struggling to hold the line. Ethan and his fellow agents had no choice but to use the infamous demon power elixirs, often called monster potions, if they hoped to stem the tide of ever more ferocious demons and keep the innocent safe. These brews were labeled dangerous for good reason. The demonic energy within them threatened to corrupt the drinker, turning human into monster. Yet when razor-sharp claws and ravenous fangs closed in, that risk seemed almost irrelevant. After all, under such a savage assault, a human life was so fragile, it rarely lasted long enough for the potion's darker effects to take hold. Chapter 1151, Monsters and Demons Everywhere. In our island nation, the old saying, "Our enemies and ourselves share the same origin," isn't just lofty philosophy, it's woven into every custom, every conversation. Yet until now, it remained figurative, a notion confined to dusty scrolls and fireside tales. Today, those tales have come alive. Creatures of legend, monsters and demons long believed to exist only in myth, roam our streets, waging brutal battles against humanity. For decades, salvation seemed within reach, thanks to the so-called supernatural power potion, an elixir that bolstered its drinkers' strength and reflexes. But the price proved perilous. Users sometimes paid in body, mind, or worse. To warn soldiers and volunteers of its dark side, the potion was renamed Yokai Power Potion, its very title a reminder that in harnessing demon-touched power, you might become something not entirely human. When the alarm sirens wail, it's not the politicians in ivory towers who answer the call. It's ordinary men and women, farmers, factory workers, former soldiers, who strap on armor and charge into carnage. Among them stands Ethan, a young warrior whose resolve is ironclad. He knows the potion's risks, but he also understands that if these monsters threaten our world, someone must stand between them and the innocent. And so, with yokai power surging through his veins, he steps forward into the chaos, ready to defend his homeland at any cost. Some of them were career soldiers. Others were ordinary citizens driven by a fierce sense of justice. In this moment, however, they all stood together, as humanity's final line of defense. Fire! It's the Dragon-Tooth soldiers. At that urgent command, members of the self-defense force snapped to attention, rifles leveling toward the shadowed corner ahead. The Dragon-Tooth soldiers, known in ancient Rome as Sparates, had truly risen from the dust of legend to menace the living. According to the Dragon-Tooth Warriors chapter of Roman mythology, these fearsome fighters spring fully armed from dragon's teeth planted in the earth, endowed with mystical strength and combat skills far beyond those of mortal men. Since the Tokyo catastrophic incident, creatures of myth and nightmare have spilled into our world not only from Japanese folklore, but from every corner of the globe. Ethan had foreseen this upheaval. As he'd warned his comrades, this was more than a local crisis. It marked the dawn of a transformation unseen in 1,000 years. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he laid eyes on the Dragon-Tooth soldiers before him. They were far more horrifying and far stranger than any account he had ever read. Where eyes should have been, only cavernous black sockets yawned. The bridge of each nose was nothing more than a bottomless void. Their lips consisted of jagged bone shards and a few fractured teeth, utterly devoid of flesh, warmth, or life. These weren't faces at all, but skulls bared by time itself, a testament to dry bones and pure despair. What made them truly nightmarish, however, was the armor they wore. Plate after plate of unknown metal clung to their emaciated frames, like the final lock sealing the gates of hell. Each piece fit so precisely that not even a sliver of daylight pierced the seams. The armor's surface gleamed with a cold, unsettling light, betraying its deadly purpose, the ultimate defense for a creature already dead. Despite the protruding rib bones and spindly limbs jutting from ill-fitting gaps, bones that seemed to belong to another realm entirely, the armor's sheer thickness and unwavering solidity left no doubt of its strength. These were skeletons armed to the teeth, encased in a near-impenetrable shell, and advancing toward Ethan with merciless intent. Ethan's breath caught in his throat the moment he laid eyes on the skeletal figure. It was unlike any dry, lifeless remains he'd ever seen in a museum or a morgue. Bones were supposed to be silent relics, simple scaffolding for flesh and muscle, serving as a reminder of lives long past. But this was something else entirely. Every inch of its frame pulsed with a faint, uncanny glow, as if an unseen force had breathed life into those bare ribs and hollow eye sockets. With each deliberate step, the skeleton's bones clicked sharply against the cold stone floor, echoing through the cavern like some grim metronome. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. What unsettled him most wasn't the eerie illumination or the rhythmic clatter. It was the weapon clenched in the creature's right hand. The blade was curved and jagged, its edge honed to a razor's keenness. In the dim torchlight, it gleamed with a chilling promise, a promise to slice through anything or anyone that stood in its path. Ethan steadied himself against a nearby column, fighting the urge to flee. His scientific mind raced to reconcile what he was witnessing with every lesson he'd ever learned about anatomy and death. Yet here, in this underground chamber, the distinction between lifeless bone and living being had been utterly obliterated. A skeleton, so notoriously silent and inert, had become a weapon of unimaginable power. He swallowed hard. Whatever force animated this creature, it was far beyond ordinary science. And now, standing between Ethan and the exit, the skeleton's hollow gaze seemed to challenge him. "Dare you come closer?" The skeleton's bony claws closed around the knife's hilt with an unsettling ease, movements so fluid they might have belonged to a living warrior born to wield that blade. Yet this was no living being, and its impossible display of strength and dexterity sent a chill through every witness. Each time its upper and lower jaws snapped, a hollow, echoing rattle rang out, like teeth chattering in a deathly cold, but far deeper and more sinister. Surrounding the armed skeleton were more than a dozen of its kind, each clad in crude bone armor. Though their gear lacked any splendor, an eerie, otherworldly aura emanated from every one of them. In their skeletal hands they gripped knives of all varieties, some long and razor-sharp, others stout and brutishly thick, each blade promising a swift and merciless end. They stood in perfect stillness, ranks of undead soldiers awaiting the command to strike. At their head stood the largest skeleton, brandishing a gleaming blade that marked him clearly as their leader. These were the legendary dragon-tooth warriors, known as Sparet, once told of only in hushed myths. Not far from this grim assembly, the self-defense forces and police units braced themselves, weapons at the ready for the battle that was about to ignite. Ethan and the rest of the defenders, members of the self-defense forces, local police, and volunteer militias, stood at the city's broken outskirts with fear and determination etched on their faces. Their hands shook as they gripped rifles and machine guns, bodies tensed for the onslaught they both dreaded and resolved to meet. Behind them, their families huddled, waiting for salvation that might never come. They had no choice but to stand their ground and unleash everything they had against these undead warriors. "Let hell itself swallow you," Ethan roared. In an instant, the night exploded with gunfire. The soldiers and officers, each pumped full of a demonic elixir that pushed human strength and reflexes to their absolute limits, rapped out a thunderous hail of tracer rounds. Belt-fed machine guns chattered relentlessly, spitting bullets like a torrential downpour that lit up the ruins in orange streaks. But against the skeleton warriors, no longer flesh and bone but cursed constructs of dark sorcery, those bullets were nothing more than an annoyance. Rounds passed clean through rib cages and skulls, leaving only delicate cracks. The skeletons shrugged off the assault as if swatting away flies, their movements eerily swift. Bereft of muscles or nerves, they nevertheless reacted faster than any living man. Ethan's heart pounded. He knew they were outmatched in every way, save for their own human will. And as another wave of skeletons crested the rubble, he lifted his rifle once more, ready to hold the line with every ounce of his strength. The arrival of the dragon-tooth soldiers only made things tougher for the self-defense forces and the police. As the armored troops advanced, the demonic power users drew their swords and met them in brutal close-quarters combat, but their resistance was short-lived. Chapter 1152, Entertaining the Gods. All the frontline troops have been wiped out. In the island nation's War Council chamber, a holographic feed of the devastated battlefield hovered above the table. The room fell deathly silent, until the defense minister, exhaustion etched into his features, gave voice to their shared horror. "We poured every resource into the demonic elixir," he admitted, glancing helplessly at his colleagues. "But only a handful of soldiers can actually withstand its power." He sank into his chair. "Out of every 10 vials we distribute, perhaps 1 or 2 recipients awaken as true demon power users. The rest simply collapse under the elixir's assault on body and mind." At the far end of the table, Ethan, chief researcher of the Elixir Project, met the minister's gaze. He'd overseen countless trials. Volunteer after volunteer had died when their will buckled under the potion's savage surge. Yet a few rare subjects had emerged transformed, veins coursing with otherworldly strength. "The losses have been staggering," the minister continued, voice taut. "Even 10 vials at the front could yield 0 new fighters. How can we hope to hold back an enemy that shows no mercy?" Ethan drew a steadying breath. "We've developed a modified protocol," he explained. "By integrating a nano-infused stabilizer into the serum, we can temper the initial shock to the body without diluting its demonic core. Early simulations indicate a significant increase in survivability, while preserving, or even enhancing, the power output." A flicker of anticipation passed among the council members. Ethan pressed on. "If the refined elixir performs in the field as it has in the lab, we may finally tip the scales. We can forge enough demon power users to turn back the invaders and protect every corner of our island." Silence reigned for a moment, heavy with the weight of their predicament. Then, with measured resolve, the defense minister nodded. "Very well. Prepare the first deployment team. This is our last chance." As the council rose to action, Ethan allowed himself a single determined thought. This time, no one else would die in vain. Ethan stood at the edge of the research chamber, watching the scientists confer in hushed tones. Their plan was as radical as it was desperate. Harvest Ethan's own demon-infused flesh and blood to brew an anti-demonic serum. In theory, his body could act as a filter, stripping away or at least suppressing the corrupting influence of demonic power on ordinary humans. It sounded like the ravings of a mad alchemist, but in this dire hour, no avenue of hope could be dismissed. Of course, such a potion wouldn't materialize overnight. Perfecting the formula would take weeks, if not months. Yet even if they succeeded, new risks lay in wait. Demonic energy was notoriously unstable. Word had reached the island nation's cabinet of a disastrous American trial. Dozens of high-ranking officials, injected with a prototype monster serum, had spiraled completely out of control. Endowed with terrifying strength, they lost all vestiges of humanity and slaughtered countless people of influence before security forces could stop them. If that was the price of progress, the islands might yet be trading one living nightmare for another. These events ignited widespread panic and upheaval across society. The U.S. government poured vast manpower and resources into quelling the unrest, but to little effect. I hear the Rothschilds, worth an estimated $50 trillion, have directly eliminated dozens of key figures. Not a single heir remains, the Chancellor whispered, his voice trembling at the name. Everyone in the room knew just how powerful the Rothschild dynasty was. Their sprawling global financial network could topple economies overnight, and now their American branch lay in ruins. The shockwaves had already rolled through Wall Street, sending markets into a tailspin. It's only the American branch, one minister ventured, as if that distinction might contain the damage. Not the British Rothschilds. But his words offered scant comfort. No matter which branch was hit, the downfall of the Rothschilds spelled a wholesale reshuffling of the world's financial order, and it couldn't have come at a worse time. With war looming on the horizon, the island nation's cabinet had never felt such immense pressure. Ethan and his closest advisors faced more than just external threats. They also had to calm domestic unrest and keep the nation running smoothly. To protect their families, they'd quietly relocated them to the Tengu district in New Tokyo City. What felt like a prudent safeguard, however, quickly sparked public outrage. Citizens accused the leadership of shirking its responsibilities, questioning whether Ethan and his circle were truly committed to the country's welfare. The cabinet ministers bore the criticism in silence. They believed that only by securing the safety of the core leadership could they effectively respond to crises and safeguard the entire nation. Still, the public buzzed with speculation. How could they draw upon Ethan, the so-called God on Earth, to save them? "Why don't we try to appease him?" one skeptic asked in a hushed conversation. "Legends say gods require grand offerings, beautiful maidens, skilled witches, the finest wines." Another minister, his voice tinged with both resignation and hope, replied, "We've already pursued that path." Privately, the council had selected a retinue of the kingdom's most beautiful young women, believing such tribute might win Ethan's favor, and with it, deliverance for the nation. They were all breathtakingly beautiful, every one of them pale-skinned and flawless, like freshly opened blossoms at dawn. For this operation, the court had even recruited the kingdom's most celebrated dancers to teach them the ancient, sacred, divine dance, hoping to win the favor of the god incarnate. All day long, beneath the soaring arches of the Tiangong Temple, the girls moved in perfect unison, their every gesture infused with reverence and grace. Golden light from the setting sun traced the curves of their bodies, casting long, elegant shadows on the marble floor. But the god incarnate remained motionless on his gilded throne, his expression unreadable. No flicker of emotion crossed his face. No ripple passed through the assembled courtiers. When the final note of music faded into the evening air, silence settled over the temple like a wall. "We've tried everything," the prime minister announced at last, voice heavy with exhaustion. He paused, eyes sweeping the ministers gathered around him. "And we have failed." A stunned stillness followed. Each minister sat frozen, haunted by the realization that their carefully orchestrated spectacle had not moved the divine at all. If even this display of beauty and devotion could not sway him, what hope remained? They would have to seek another way, this time one that did not rely on the fickle favor of a god. Tokyo, amid the ruins of Bunkyo District. "Run!" A piercing cry shattered the night's quiet, instantly followed by frantic screams. Driven by an unseen hand of terror, villagers bolted from their homes, desperate to put distance between themselves and whatever horror lurked in the darkness. "It's a monster!" someone yelled. "No, a cyclops!" another voice countered, cutting through the panic. By daylight, such talk might pass for an overactive child's fantasy or an old person's myth. Tonight, however, it was the truest expression of the dread gripping every soul. From far off came a deep, resonant thrum, like the ancient breathing of a giant, shaking the earth and rattling hearts. At the end of the street, a shape materialized, born of nightmares. At first glance a man, until you took in the scale. He, or it, towered impossibly high, a walking colossus that dwarfed houses and trees alike. Beneath that colossal form, even the tallest human seemed insignificant, swallowed by its shadow. Ethan had always known that anyone towering over 2 meters was exceptional, and that even the giants of legend rarely broke the 3-meter mark. But the creature standing at the far end of the street was at least 10 meters tall. It loomed like a living monument, its colossal frame casting a shadow that swallowed the entire block. What struck Ethan most was its face, a rugged expanse of bulging muscles, as though centuries of wind, frost, and time had carved it from stone. It was a visage of raw terror and awe-inspiring majesty all at once. Chapter 1153, Thunderfist. The Cyclops' face was a terrifying sight, dominated by a single abyssal eye that took up nearly 2/3 of its skull. This massive orb glowed a deep sapphire, flickering with an unsettling light as if it could pierce straight into the darkest corners of one's fear and despair. When the eye slowly swept across its surroundings, the shifting glow rippled across the cornea like a living thing, radiating a malevolent intelligence. Below this monstrous eye yawned a gaping maw bristling with jagged fangs. Each tooth was a cruel work of art, razor-sharp, glinting with cold, unfeeling light, ready to rip through any obstacle. They jutted from the jaws at irregular intervals, enhancing the creature's nightmarish appearance. Whenever the Cyclops roared, its fangs clashed together like thunder rolling through the mountains, the sound so deafening it shook the ground. Between its great eye and cavernous mouth, 2 tiny nostrils, so compressed they barely registered, quivered as the beast inhaled in ragged, desperate gulps to sustain its monstrous existence. Ethan stood frozen at the crossroads, his heart pounding as the colossal figure before him took shape in the moonlight. Its face was a grotesque mask, one great, unblinking eye set above a cavernous mouth, so inhuman that it sent an involuntary shiver down his spine. Its skin wasn't flesh at all, but seemed forged from countless layers of stone and steel, each fissure and ridge radiating an unbreakable strength. Without a hint of hesitation, the Cyclops fixed its gaze on the gathered crowd and began to advance. Its 2 legs, each as thick as ancient pillars, moved with deliberate slowness, as if to mock the ground beneath them. Every footfall exploded into a deafening roar, an echo of some primeval beast that reverberated through the night and shook Ethan to his core. He could almost feel the earth quaking beneath his boots, waves of vibration rippling outward until even distant onlookers would have felt the tremors. A bitter wind whipped around them, carrying a biting chill that felt like the world itself was mourning. The howl of the night breeze mingled with the still thundering echoes of those steps, weaving together into a grim prelude to disaster. Ethan drew in a sharp breath, blood pounding in his ears. He knew, without a doubt, that nothing would ever be the same again. The Bunkyo district was engulfed in chaos, every street filled with terrified cries and desperate pleas for help. Panicked residents scattered in all directions. Some were knocked off their feet and trampled under the weight of those fleeing behind them. Others clutched their children so tightly their knuckles turned white, unwilling to let go of their only hope. Still more bolted down side streets, praying they could escape this living nightmare. Fear and despair were etched on every face, and each frantic step felt like a gamble with death. In the midst of the bedlam, a handful of the brave tried to stand their ground. They armed themselves with whatever they could find, broken boards, metal rods, even discarded pipes, launching a futile defense against the towering Cyclops. But the creature's immense bulk and brute strength rendered their efforts almost laughable. Each makeshift weapon struck the giant's hide with a hollow thud, unable to leave so much as a scratch. Those who dared to throw their bodies in its path were swept aside like autumn leaves in a gale. These people were already refugees, survivors of Tokyo's earlier destruction. And now, as they faced down this unimaginable horror, everything they once knew seemed to shatter beyond repair. Ethan and the other survivors huddled among the crumbling ruins. desperate for any spark of hope. But hope died the moment they laid eyes on the Cyclops towering before them, easily 10 meters tall, its massive frame moving with uncanny speed and fluidity. Under its flesh, bone and muscle seemed almost as hard as steel, far denser than any alloy. Every weapon they had, rifles, grenades, even light artillery, bounced harmlessly off its hide. Panic rippled through the group as the monster swung its gargantuan arms. In a heartbeat, it scooped up several stragglers, still fumbling with their guns, holding them aloft like broken toys. Then, with a roar that shook the shattered buildings around them, it hurled those poor souls into its cavernous maw. Bones snapped and organs burst under its razor-sharp teeth. A sickening symphony of crunching and tearing filled the air as blood splattered across its lips. Far from recoiling in disgust, the Cyclops inhaled deeply, greedily drawing every scrap of flesh into its mouth as if savoring a grand feast. When at last it finished, the creature roared triumphantly and strode off into the wreckage, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. The few survivors left clutched one another, wide-eyed and trembling. Fear and despair had hollowed out their spirits. Now they could only wonder if they were next. Ethan crouched behind the shattered remains of a concrete barrier, his heart pounding as the 10-meter-tall Cyclops stalked through the ruined streets of Tokyo. All around him, panic reigned. Some survivors, exhausted and terrified, dropped to their knees with hands clasped over their heads, resigned to the monster's inevitable assault. Others still tried to flee, though their legs wobbled with fatigue, and any of them could easily become the Cyclops' next victim. Suddenly, a low rumble rolled across the sky. Ethan looked up just as a jagged bolt of lightning rent the clouds and struck the Cyclops squarely in the shoulder. The whole world seemed to blaze with light. The beast convulsed from the impact, unleashing a roar that shook even the steel-reinforced ruins. "Damn you!" it bellowed in raw fury and pain. Before Ethan could react, a clear, commanding voice rang out, both alluring and authoritative. High above the wreckage, a lone figure drifted downward. She wore a sleek black combat suit that clung to her form, her hands crackling with electric energy, like two brilliant flash bombs blooming against the night. It was Shizuka Hiratsuka. Since Tokyo's fall, Shizuka had scoured the city for any survivors, determined to pull them from despair. When she learned that a Cyclops of monstrous size was tearing through the debris, she had wasted no time. Now, charged with lightning, she touched down between Ethan and the rampaging creature. The air crackled around her as she readied to confront the Cyclops and to give those trapped below a chance to escape. Ethan knew that only he could stand against this monstrosity and kindle a spark of hope for the survivors. Yet when he finally came face to face with the enormous Cyclops, a flicker of fear broke through his resolve. He'd been transformed into something far beyond human, gifted with incredible strength and speed, but the sheer scale of the giant before him stirred an ancient dread he'd never fully conquered. The creature towered over him, its single eye gleaming like a blood-red lantern. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, and the pounding echoed in his ears like distant war drums. A wave of oppressive heat radiated from the beast, and for a moment it felt as if the world itself were closing in. He took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing his trembling hands to unclench. He was no ordinary man anymore. He carried the power to protect, the duty to fight. Drawing on every ounce of discipline he'd learned since awakening his new abilities, Ethan summoned the crackling energy of thunder and lightning into his fists. Sparks danced across his knuckles, illuminating the darkness around him. Steeling himself, he planted his feet firmly on the rocky ground. The Cyclops let out a roar that rattled the ruins, then began to lumber forward. Ethan raised his electrified fists. His fear lingered at the edge of his thoughts, but he could not back down. With a silent vow to the people depending on him, he launched himself at the giant, lightning blazing, ready to strike the decisive blow. Chapter 1154. Killing lightning roared to life around Shizuka Hiratsuka's right fist, as if a primordial beast had broken free from the abyss. The bolts flowed like liquid mercury, illuminating the murky space and slicing through the darkness with brilliant, dancing arcs. They weren't haphazard flashes, but strands woven by some hidden cosmic law, threads twisting into a vast, intricate electric net that sprang up around the Cyclops. The monster towered over 10 meters tall, its skin tougher than granite. Trapped in the crackling cage, it stood frozen in terror. Its single bloodshot eye darted wildly as it battered against the unseen bonds. Yet every strand of that net seemed charged with ancient power, each arc locking onto the Cyclops' flesh with unbreakable precision. No matter how it thrashed, escape was impossible. The power of Shizuka's lightning held it fast, the crackle of energy sealing the creature's fate. Shizuka Hiratsuka stood just outside the crackling electric fence. Above her, forked lightning streaked across the sky, and each flash caught her long hair, setting it aglow with a strange silvery sheen. Her aura throbbed in time with the storm, as though her very spirit resonated with the thunder rolling between earth and sky. She inhaled deeply, feeling the raw power surging through her like water bursting a dam. Every ounce of that energy gathered in her right fist. "Thunderstorm fist," she intoned, her voice low and deadly calm. In an instant, she vanished, leaving only a jagged afterimage of lightning where she'd stood. Tapping directly into her lightning spirit, Shizuka's speed and reflexes became superhuman. She covered the 100 meters to the Cyclops in less than a blink. She reappeared at its side, fist crackling with electric light, coalescing into a spinning orb of pure energy. Every muscle in her body coiled for impact, her resolve as unshakable as a thunderclap. Then, with the force to shatter stone, she drove her charged fist into the giant's shin. Though Shizuka Hiratsuka stood so small beside the Cyclops, she might have seemed an insect. The power she unleashed shook the very air like a moving mountain. When her fist slammed into the creature's shin, space itself appeared to rend apart. A torrent of lightning surged forth, instantly engulfing the monster's leg. The thick flesh around its shin tore open under the electrical onslaught, splitting and shredding like paper, and revealed the hard white bone beneath. Blackened scorch marks raced across the exposed bone, and a sharp, acrid scent of burning flesh filled the air. Yet the lightning did not stop there. It slithered deeper, following every crack in the bone. Like a living snake, the electric current wound its way between his leg bones, coating the entire limb in a blinding, thunderous light. The Cyclops let out a piercing roar of agony and despair. His massive frame convulsed violently, as though gripped by an unseen force. He staggered, desperately trying to shift his weight to his unhurt leg, but the impact had destroyed his balance. Slowly, inexorably, his enormous body began to tilt, as if on the verge of toppling over. In his single, colossal eye burned nothing but fear and panic. The Cyclops had never faced such a formidable opponent, and it certainly hadn't expected to be defeated by one so small. Yet Shizuka Hiratsuka offered it no quarter. In a blur of motion, she reappeared behind the creature, her other fist enveloped in crackling lightning. Like a second thunderbolt, it smashed into the Cyclops' uninjured shin, electricity coursing through the bone with a bone-shaking crack. The beast's two legs, now grievously wounded, buckled beneath its weight. It let out a piercing roar as it teetered on the brink of collapse. Shizuka wasted no time. With a single fluid motion, she was on its broad shoulders. She raised both arms high, palms turned upward, as though she were about to snatch the storm from the sky itself. In that moment, the air around her fell eerily still. Wind and dust alike held their breath. Shizuka drew in a D.P. measured breath, every muscle coiled like a spring. Spiritual energy flooded her veins, surging outward in an unstoppable wave, ready to crash down upon the fallen giant. Ethan stood amid the smoldering ruins, watching the sorceress intently. Her eyes were closed, brow furrowed in fierce concentration, as if she were gathering every ounce of her will to unleash a single devastating blow. Then, without warning, she thrust her palms downward. A deafening roar swept through the shattered streets, rattling the broken walls of the crumbled city. Between her hands, a torrent of lightning sprang to life, a blinding pillar of crackling energy that writhed like a thunder dragon. It streaked through the air, tearing apart everything in its path, warping space itself with its raw power. Even the mighty Cyclops, towering, muscle-bound, and once seemingly invincible, looked puny before this living storm. A flicker of dread passed through its single, bloodshot eye, but it could not escape what was coming. With an earth-shaking boom, the thunder dragon slammed into the Cyclops' massive skull. In that instant, the sky brightened as if struck by a second sun, and a rolling thunderclap echoed across the ruinous landscape, lingering long after the lightning faded. Dust and rubble rained down, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to hold its breath, then collapsed into stunned silence, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder among the ruins. The instant the lightning struck, the Cyclops' massive skull was engulfed in blinding electric fire. Bolts of thunderous energy raced through its muscles and shattered bone, tearing through every fiber with relentless force. The creature howled in agony as its weight shifted, and, like a collapsing mountain, it pitched backward and crashed to the earth. The impact shook the ground, sending up a choking plume of dust and rubble that blotted out the sun. Underneath the swirling haze, the Cyclops thrashed helplessly, its limbs flailing as it fought to rise, only to discover its strength utterly spent. The thunderbolt had drained it of all power. Now it lay prone and defeated, awaiting whatever end might come. A short distance away, Hiratsuka Shizuka stood panting, her face ashen and her brow slick with sweat. The spell had consumed far more of her spirit energy than she'd expected. After all, this Cyclops was no ordinary beast. Its power rivaled that of a skeleton soldier, and even came close to that of an ogre. A tank would have a hard time holding its ground against such an opponent, let alone a flesh-and-blood human like Shizuka Hiratsuka. Chapter 1155, Experiments and Changes. The final strike tore through the Cyclops like a lightning bolt, leaving it lifeless on the scorched ground. The residual thunderous energy crackled through its massive frame, ravaging every last trace of vitality and ensuring the creature could not rise again. In the stunned silence that followed, Shizuka Hiratsuka slowly began to restore her spiritual energy. She settled into a cross-legged posture, fingers interlaced, and closed her eyes. With deliberate calm, she released every ounce of tension from her body and attuned herself to the flow of energy between heaven and earth. Each breath drew in raw spiritual power, knitting together her soul, will, and physical vitality into a single harmonious current. As she meditated, the teachings of Ethan, the man who had guided her in harnessing spiritual power, surfaced in her mind. He had told her that spiritual energy is not conjured from thin air, but born of the ceaseless interaction between a person's inner world and the wider universe. It is the product of spirit, mind, will, and life force merging with external elements. Joy, fear, fatigue, triumph, each emotion and every step of physical training could swell one's spiritual reservoir. Even the simple acts of breathing deeply, eating nourishing food, or bathing in sunlight were, Ethan had explained, channels through which humans commune with and draw strength from the world around them. Visualizing that cosmic exchange, Shizuka felt her energy pool deepen and expand. Slowly, power returned to her limbs, clarity to her thoughts, and in that quiet communion with nature's forces, she prepared herself for whatever challenges lay ahead. Ethan stood at the heart of Tiangong Temple's main hall, arms crossed as flickering lantern light danced over the monstrous corpse before him. Around them, incense smoke curled up from the bronze censers, carrying the faint scent of sandalwood and brimstone. "Master Ethan," Hiratsuka Shizuka said, stepping closer to the fallen Cyclops, "its body should make excellent raw material for a new weapon." Ethan inclined his head. "Bring it back to the Forge Masters. With a creature like this, they can infuse the blade or armor with its natural resilience and latent magic." Shizuka's eyes gleamed. Though she wielded formidable thunder chi, she preferred precision over brute force. "I don't need a greatsword," she explained. "Just a pair of gauntlets or bracers, something to channel my fist strikes. Even my thunder-infused punches lose power if I expend too much spiritual energy protecting my arms." Ethan gave a small smile. "The foundry masters at Tiangong specialize in tailoring weapons to a warrior's unique style. If anyone can forge gauntlets that amplify your thunder chi, it's them." As Shizuka set to work supervising the loading of the Cyclops corpse onto a handcart, Ethan turned to the vast city visible through the temple's open gates. Beyond the ancient stone walls lay New Tokyo City, a sprawling metropolis of neon and shadows where prosperity and chaos coexisted in uneasy balance. The old police and military forces had all but surrendered control. Now, order or disorder depended on a new breed of enforcers. Demons walking in human form, gifted spiritualists like Shizuka, and underground factions vied for dominance under the cover of night. For Ethan and his disciples at Tiangong, each battle was a chance to tip the scales. And with every monster's remains they reclaimed, their power and the city's fate grew ever more entwined. In New Tokyo City, ability users are the last line of defense, zipping through streets and alleys, confronting demons emerging from the shadows, and shielding ordinary citizens from harm. But their power has its limits. They can only protect the neighborhoods surrounding Tiangong District. Beyond that perimeter, order unravels. In the city's outer reaches, demons and human greed fester side by side, creating a gray zone that even New Tokyo's guardians cannot reach. As crime and demon attacks multiply, the government has resorted to drastic measures. They've begun recruiting death row inmates and violent felons, injecting them with an experimental serum nicknamed Monster Potion. The hope is to transform these criminals into demon fighters with enhanced combat abilities. It's a desperate, controversial gamble, but with New Tokyo's survival at stake, they see no alternative. Those prisoners who survive the transformation and prove themselves capable of slaying demons on the battlefield are offered a full pardon, a chance at rebirth if they can turn their monstrous powers against the city's darkest threats. Not everyone is so fortunate or willing to become a mere pawn of the government. A handful of newly empowered individuals did try to rebel, only to be ruthlessly suppressed by martial artists who, like spiritualists, had transcended their ordinary origins. Unlike those who rely on demonic forces, these practitioners had mastered the art of harnessing their own spirit, becoming both more stable and far more formidable in combat. On a rainy afternoon in New Tokyo City, a sleek black sedan eased up to the guarded entrance of Guhai Pharmaceuticals. This clandestine facility wasn't merely the world's premier center for pharmaceutical research, it was also a showcase where global dignitaries peered into tomorrow's breakthroughs in technology and human potential. Today, the company's president, a portly, middle-aged man with hair that seemed to explode from his scalp, personally escorted a delegation of top officials from around the world. He led them through gleaming corridors, pausing at every state-of-the-art lab and demonstration chamber. Ding! A brisk card swipe punctuated the low hum of conversation as the group passed through the final security gate and into the heart of Guhai's most closely guarded secrets. President Guhai offered a confident, enigmatic smile and gestured for everyone to follow him. As the heavy door eased open, a rush of frigid air spilled into the foyer, carrying a subtle vibration that set a shiver through the assembled guests, almost as if the air itself was whispering a cryptic secret. Polite, practiced smiles froze on the faces of the dignitaries. Even the smallest muscles twitched, caught off guard by the sudden chill. Rather than stepping inside immediately, President Guhai paused in the doorway, standing perfectly still, as though waiting for some unspoken signal. A moment stretched into 30 seconds of tense silence before he finally raised his hand once more, inviting the group forward. Though these were seasoned elites, people accustomed to navigating every twist and turn of power, they couldn't hide the flicker of uncertainty in their eyes. Anticipation mingled with unease as they crossed the threshold into Guhai Pharmaceuticals' domain, where a flawless corridor of gleaming white tiles and polished steel lay waiting ahead. Ethan stepped into the long, gleaming corridor, flanked on both sides by one-way observation windows. Beyond the glass, he could just make out researchers bustling among advanced instruments and experimental rigs. The stark white walls and transparent partitions seemed to broadcast a single message, clean and sterile. It was impossible not to feel the weight of scientific rigor and purity here. As he walked farther down the hall, a faint tang of disinfectant filled the air, a sharp contrast to the noise and activity he'd left behind. Every footstep sounded muted against the polished floor, as though ushering him into some hidden, almost otherworldly domain. At the corridor's end, a heavy steel door slid open with a quiet hiss. Ethan paused for a moment, then followed as it revealed an immense laboratory, the beating heart of Guhai Pharmaceutical and the R&D and testing center for the so-called Monster Potion. Inside, soft, even lighting washed over row after row of towering shelves. A hushed calm settled over the space, lending it an aura of clinical detachment. Glass reagent bottles, some crystal clear, Others tinted in bright jewel-like hues, lined every surface. Chash won a tiny repository of chemical possibility. Ethan drew a slow breath. This was where the real work began. In the heart of the facility, a towering glass partition divides the main laboratory from a pristine operating room-style chamber. On one side of that transparent wall, fluorescent light gives way to the sterile glare of shadowless lamps. Inside, a team of researchers in crisp white chemical protective suits works with military precision. Their bodies are encased head to toe, revealing nothing but their eyes and a narrow strip of skin, making them look less like people and more like futuristic soldiers on a secret mission. Each holds a gleaming scalpel, each movement measured and exact. Every cut is deliberate, executed without hesitation, an unmistakable testament to their professionalism and their relentless pursuit of scientific perfection. Chapter 1156, The Rest Defies Scientific Explanation. Ethan hovered at the edge of the stainless steel operating table, heart hammering in his chest. Before him lay a monstrous specimen, nearly 3 meters tall, its spiky hide dripping with something dark and viscous. Jagged plates ran along its limbs, which were unnaturally long and ended in razor-sharp claws. Even its inert tail, with barbs thick as an adult's arm, seemed poised to whip back to life and strike. A low, animalistic growl echoed somewhere in the chamber's sterile silence. The creature's power was palpable, as if a single flex of its muscles could shatter the reinforced glass of the observation window. Ethan took a careful step closer, careful not to show the dread twisting in his gut. His team had estimated its mass, its bone density, its lethal potential, but none of that prepared them for what they would see next. Gingerly, Ethan reached forward and cradled the creature's angular skull in both hands. With measured pressure, he tipped it so that the side of its face pressed against the cool metal surface. The transformation was instantaneous. All the alien menace drained away, leaving behind something far more horrific. The head that Ethan now held was unmistakably human, only grotesquely mutilated. Skin was stretched over bulging bone, every sinew visible beneath tortured flesh. The features had been warped by agony and terror, the cheekbones prominent and the jaw twisted into a silent scream. Even in death, the eyes, sunken and swollen, held the last vestiges of fear and denial. A stunned silence fell over the lab. Instruments lay forgotten, and the bright overhead lights seemed to dim. Ethan's voice caught as he struggled to find words. What did they do to him? Around him, the researchers exchanged glances of horror. Whoever, or whatever, had transformed this man into a living weapon had crossed every boundary of science and humanity. And now, holding the evidence in his hands, Ethan realized their expedition had stumbled into the depths of a nightmare no protocol could ever explain. Ethan listened as President Guhai offered a calm explanation. Rest assured, Guhai said, voice steady. Every subject chosen for this experiment is a death row inmate who has been convicted through due process. Legally, their right to life has already been forfeit. Moreover, in the Security Treaty supplementary regulations will officially promulgate next week, procedures like these will be explicitly recognized as lawful, meant to propel medical science forward and bring about unprecedented advances for humankind. At Guhai's subtle signal, Ethan and the others moved on. They passed down a long, sterile corridor and came to a second laboratory. Inside, under harsh white lights, a creature very much alive, though scarcely distinguishable from the corpse they'd just seen, was locked behind heavy iron bars. Its muscles twitched with spasms of pain, and every forced breath issued a desperate roar that filled the room with dread. The beast's eyes were blank and bewildered, stripped of reason or feeling, yet when those vacant eyes swept over the spectators, every man and woman there recoiled. Even Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. A suffocating dread filled the observation room, as though invisible blades pressed against your throat with every heartbeat. Inside the iron cage, the creature prowled restlessly. Each pace sent the bars rattling and its spines rasping against the metal walls in a sound as sharp as steel slicing through air. A cold shiver ran through everyone watching. The beast's tail lashed wildly, its keratin barbs clattering against the bars in harsh, echoing beats, an announcement of its fury and power. Though the monster could not see them through the one-way glass, its oppressive presence weighed on the crowd. People instinctively stepped back, eyes wide with fear, desperate to escape this chamber of menace. President Gu Hai broke the tense silence. This abomination was created by our monster serum. The surge of monster energy spread far more rapidly than we anticipated. These creatures were once human, but the serum's corrupting force has turned them into monsters. The room fell silent again. Around the president, each person present, leaders in their respective fields, stood frozen by the terrifying demonstration. They were the titans of modern power, research behemoths whose laboratories rivaled any national facility, regional directors wielding near-absolute executive authority, backers of entire regimes with fortunes vast enough to reshape the world order. And yet, in this room, they all felt strangely diminished. They hadn't come merely seeking money that could be printed at will by the United States, the research's chief financier. No, what they truly needed were the rare, irreplaceable materials that would propel their projects to fruition. "We've done it," President Gu Hai announced, his voice brimming with pride. "We've managed to weaken the monster's living tissue." A low murmur rippled through the assembly. The original organic structure had been so overwhelmingly powerful that it spawned the very monstrosities these leaders had witnessed in the field. Only by surgically stripping away that primal strength could they hope to control, replicate, or weaponize it. Ethan sat at the edge of the long conference table, watching the power brokers exchange wary glances. He was the lone outsider here, a researcher caught between ambition and conscience. As the room fell silent, all eyes turned back to Gu Hai, hungry for details. What came next would decide not just the fate of this experiment, but the future of every nation represented in this hall. Ethan stepped into the laboratory's quiet glow, his gaze drawn to a row of transparent canisters tucked away in the far corner. Each one contained a dull, gelatinous mass, monster flesh and blood tissue stripped of its vitality by an unholy chemical bath. Under the harsh light, the once pulsing material lay inert, its edges fraying like old parchment. President Gu Hai strode forward and, with a pair of steel tweezers, lifted a small sliver of tissue from one of the jars. He held it up for the group to see, his expression serious. 10 milliliters of our strongest reagent is enough to dissolve an adult human body, he said quietly. Monstrous cells are tougher, soaking them takes longer, but this solution, he tapped the jar, will neutralize their activity, rendering them as lifeless as these samples. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Weakening the tissue is only the first step. Once the cells are inert, we can process them safely. Ethan's stomach churned at the thought, but he forced himself to nod. Gu Hai's tone grew even more solemn. Next, he continued, we must suppress the human immune response. It's not unlike preparing for an organ transplant. We'll need to condition the patient's body so it accepts these treated tissues without mounting an attack. Ethan swallowed. The complexity and risk of the project made his pulse quicken, but there was no turning back now. Ethan sat motionless at the polished conference table, the soft glow of overhead lamps casting long shadows across the laboratory. Around him, the world's top immunologists and bioengineers exchanged anxious glances, their breath shallow in the hush that followed President Gu Hai's declaration. We need a way to prevent the human immune system from recognizing and rejecting monster flesh and blood, Gu Hai had said, his voice steady but grave. He folded his hands on the tabletop and waited. Only the low hum of incubators and the faint click of instruments broke the silence. After several heartbeats, Dr. Lang, the team's lead immunologist, cleared his throat. That's it? He stammered, eyes widening. Is there more to your plan? Whispers rippled around the room. Everyone knew the stakes. If they could solve this, they could integrate monster-derived tissues, organs, muscles, even neural grafts, into human patients, endowing them with unprecedented strength and resilience. Such a breakthrough would rewrite the rules of medicine and warfare alike. It seemed impossible that Gu Hai, armed with the nation's greatest resources, had nothing but an open-ended goal to offer. President Gu Hai leaned back, exhaling slowly. Gentlemen, he said, we have the best-equipped lab in the world. Our funding, our talent, everything this country can muster is here. Do you honestly believe we would stand before you with nothing to show after months of work? A ripple of uneasy laughter swept the table. They had assumed the conversation would turn to protocols, trial results, timelines. Instead, Guhai's next words stopped them cold. "They did it," he said quietly, regret tinging his tone. "They've already figured it out." Silence fell again, deeper than before. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. He met Guhai's gaze and saw the same helplessness the president's voice had betrayed. Somewhere, behind locked doors and midnight shifts, teams of scientists had already cracked the code to immunological tolerance for alien tissues, monsters' tissues. And now that knowledge existed outside his control. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, letting the weight of that revelation settle. The project had moved faster than anyone had expected. The line between human and whatever these creatures were had already begun to blur. And in that moment, he realized they stood at the precipice of a new era, one neither wholly human nor wholly monstrous, but something far more unpredictable. Ethan's voice cut through the tense silence. Because what remains is simply beyond the reach of today's science. His words hit like a bombshell. Everyone in the room exchanged stunned looks, their eyes wide with confusion and disbelief. Chapter 1157, Wakatsuki Samurai. Ethan stared at President Guhai in disbelief. "What do you mean the rest is beyond the scope of science?" Guhai's gaze grew distant and inscrutable as he spoke. "The flesh and blood of these monsters contains a power we simply cannot explain. It isn't governed by physics or chemistry. It transcends every scientific boundary we've ever known. Compared to it, our entire body of knowledge and technology might as well be a child's plaything, insignificant and utterly powerless." There was genuine awe in Guhai's voice. "This energy seems almost conscious. It behaves as if it's a living entity unto itself, untouched by human logic and indifferent to the laws of physics. At times it's as gentle as a spring breeze. At others, it rages like a storm. It's unpredictable, uncontrollable." His words hung in the air, a sober admission of how little humanity truly understands the forces they're up against. With that, Guhai beckoned them to follow. They wound their way through a labyrinth of sterile corridors until they reached the heart of the facility, a cavernous underground chamber vast enough to hold thousands. Silence settled over the group as they took in the staggering scale of the space and the mysteries that lay buried within. The arena rose around them like an ancient Roman Colosseum, a series of sweeping, towering walls encircling a vast, funnel-shaped pit at its center. From their vantage point on a circular platform high above, spectators could look down and take in the entire scene. Strips of pulsing LED lights ran along the platform's edge, lending a striking, modern contrast to the cavernous, shadowed chamber beneath. Below, in that funnel-shaped battleground, something extraordinary was about to unfold. All eyes focused on the lone figure standing motionless at the arena's heart. Ethan's cropped yellow hair caught the dim glow of the LEDs, making it almost luminescent. His broad shoulders and powerful frame stood rock solid, as if carved from stone. He was shirtless, every muscle defined in sharp relief, each sinew hinting at strength barely contained. Most striking of all was the scar bisecting his chest. At its center, where his heart lay, the dark seam of a surgical suture was faintly visible, as though Ethan's skin had been painstakingly grafted back together. Yet, around that scar, something astonishing was happening. Patches of scaly, otherworldly flesh were creeping outward, knitting themselves seamlessly into his own. It looked as if this monstrous hide had become one with his body, as if Ethan were in the midst of a transformation that defied reason and promising a miracle none would soon forget. "Ethan, get ready. The test is about to begin." President Guhai's voice trembled with both anticipation and nerves as he looked at the man standing before him, pride and trust shining in his eyes. "I'm ready," Ethan said quietly, his tone calm and unwavering. There was no hint of fear in his gaze, only a fierce eagerness for whatever challenge lay ahead. "President Guhai, who is he?" an investor asked, leaning forward. Around the room, the others had their eyes fixed on Ethan, searching his unremarkable frame for signs of something extraordinary. Guhai smiled, his chest swelling with pride. "He isn't an ordinary man. His muscle fiber density registers at 52 times that of a normal human. By the age of 7, he could easily crush special-grade titanium alloy, and even now, his strength leaves everyone who witnesses it speechless." "Superhuman physique," an expert breathed, eyes widening. A ripple of stunned realization passed through the assembled group. This unassuming man might just be humanity's greatest hope against the monsters and demons threatening their world. President Guhai cleared his throat and began, "What we're doing is grafting weakened monster tissue, flesh and blood, into a human host. The host's own adaptive and absorptive systems will gradually integrate this power, preventing the monster energy from overwhelming and transforming them entirely." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "Our first true success in this research is the Wakatsuki Samurai project." In that moment, the ceiling above them cracked open with a thunderous roar. A heavy cage descended on cables, coming to rest at the center of the arena. Inside, the figure they all recognized as human looked anything but. Once a person, now a creature consumed by monster power, it crouched on all fours. Its eyes burned crimson, saliva dripped from its snarling maw, and each muscle twitched with barely restrained ferocity. The cage door swung wide, and without hesitation, the beast hurled itself forward. It drew a flawless arc through the air, like a streak of lightning against a midnight sky, and landed with such force the entire floor trembled. From its coccyx unfurled a long whip-like tail, while jagged spines ran down its back, glinting coldly as though each could slice through steel. The arena fell into tense silence, everyone bracing for the attack they knew was coming. The creature landed on all fours, its body shifting in a blur as it crouched low. In the next instant, it sprang forward like a cornered beast, closing the distance to Ethan in the blink of an eye. Its speed seemed to exceed human limits, only faint afterimages wavered in the air. A long, sinewy tail whipped behind it, stirring gusts of wind, and razor-sharp claws sliced through the air with a high-pitched whistle. A pale shockwave crackled around each talon, as if space itself were being torn apart. With claws outstretched, the monster aimed straight for Ethan's throat, intending to kill him in a single lethal strike. But Ethan did not flinch. He stood his ground, eyes locked calmly on the attacking beast. No hint of fear crossed his face, only unwavering resolve. At the very moment the monster lunged, Ethan sprang into action. His right hand snapped into a fist so fast his muscles seemed to swell beneath his skin. He drew that coiled power into a single devastating blow. Like a dragon roaring to life, his fist cut through the air. Bang! The impact fractured the night's silence. A shockwave rippled outward as Ethan's punch met the creature's cheek, driving it backward on its haunches and sending shards of cold moonlight scattering across the ground. The beast snarled, raking its claws through empty air, stunned by the force of Ethan's counterstrike. For a heartbeat, both warrior and monster hovered on the brink, Ethan's chest heaving, his gaze fierce and unyielding, the creature's yellow eyes wide with surprise. Then the real fight began. Ethan, the Wakatsuki warrior, delivered a straightforward, yet devastating punch that shredded the air at near supersonic speed. The blow sent the hulking creature sprawling across the cracked pavement, but it wasn't enough to kill it. With a hiss of frustration, the monster rolled upright and sprang to its feet, its eyes blazing a deeper crimson, as if stoked by furious flames. Clearly enraged by Ethan's strike, the beast tensed every sinew and prepared to lunge again. From its sheer resilience, and from the way Ethan braced himself, it was obvious neither fighter was anywhere near a common skeleton soldier's level. Both had already eclipsed that rank, straddling the boundary between elite undead and full-fledged ogre-class monstrosity. Even rounds from an anti-material sniper rifle would carve nothing more than fingernail-deep wounds into their flesh, far from enough to kill. A direct headshot might shatter a human skull, but against their reinforced bone, it would barely graze the surface. Such is the fearsome advantage of demon-powered warriors. As long as the core material is strong, their strength only grows. Chapter 1158, Subduing Demonic Power with Will. Ethan, the Wakatsuki Samurai, and the monstrous fiend before him moved with terrifying speed. Each of their blows created shockwaves that rippled through the mountainside, as if the earth itself quivered in dread. Ethan's presence radiated a raw, animalistic fury. Every pore seemed aflame with crimson hostility, scorching the air around him until it wavered in heat. Across from him, the creature's flesh pulsed with an otherworldly, demonic aura, its very form twisted by dark power. Yet despite that menacing energy, it behaved like a trapped beast, muscles coiled with tension, eyes darting for any sign of escape from this inevitable clash. Their fierce exchange had reached a tense equilibrium, neither combatant able to gain the upper hand, when a sudden gale ripped down the mountain slope. The wind slammed into them with hurricane force, shattering the fragile stalemate. Far below, the fortified base's steel blast shields, built to withstand fighter jet impacts, groaned and rang, sheets of metal vibrating so violently they threatened to buckle under the strain. Ethan steadied himself against the blast, eyes narrowed, will steadfast. This unexpected tempest was no ordinary wind. It reeked of sorcery and malice, as though the demon's dark essence had called it forth. Bracing his sword, Ethan prepared to turn this new assault to his advantage. In a battle of raw power and unyielding resolve, he would prove that human will, even when pitted against unholy forces, could still conquer the darkest of magics. Wind isn't just a force of nature in this moment. It moves at Ethan's command, heralding the deadly strike he's about to unleash. In a blur faster than the raging gusts around him, Ethan's right hand twists into a tiger claw. Pushing his strength to the absolute limit, he compresses the very air's molecules into ghostly, milky white ripples, as if reality itself were warping under his power. When Ethan's claw finally crashes against the monster's throat, the air freezes for an instant. Then those pent-up waves erupt like a long-dormant volcano. This impact isn't merely flesh against flesh. It's the clash of two worlds, human martial might pitted against ancient, otherworldly force. The shock unleashes high-frequency vibrations that tear through the chamber, producing a roar so fierce it seems to shake the walls themselves. Within the enclosed space, sound waves ripple outward in visible concentric rings, as though the very air quivers in the aftermath of Ethan's assault. The entire room trembled as a fierce gust of wind roared through it. Overhead lights swung violently, their metal fixtures screeching against each other, as though the building itself were creaking under the strain. Fine cracks webbed across the walls, evidence that the structure was nearing its breaking point. Anyone caught in the blast, investors in crisp suits, curious onlookers, seemed no more than leaves caught in a whirlwind. Some were hurled against the walls with dull thuds before sliding limply to the floor. Others tumbled across the polished surface, colliding and scrambling in panicked confusion. Shouts and screams intertwined in a chaotic cacophony. This kind of destructive force? Missiles? An investor who was clutching a support column to stay upright shouted in horror. His eyes were fixed on the eye of the storm at the room's center, the clash between the Wakatsuki samurai and the monstrous creature, a maelstrom of power devouring everything around it. Ethan's strike hit with the force and speed of a missile. So fast the eye could barely follow, so powerful it could jolt multi-ton machinery, and so destructive that the entire room shuddered as if struck by a minor earthquake. The pressure struck like a mountain, unyielding, dense, and it was impossible to believe it came from a mere human frame. Every sinew in Ethan's body, strengthened by the monster's transplanted flesh and blood, seemed charged with an invisible energy. With a resonant crack, the creature beneath him finally buckled. Its gargantuan bulk slammed into the floor, gouging a deep crater in the steel plating below. From the impact's center, spiderweb fractures fanned out across a 10-meter radius, the metal splintering like glass under a giant hammer. Those fissures yawned outward, scars scored into the very ground. In that moment, the transformation wrought by the monstrous graft became undeniable. Ethan's body, once purely human, now pulsed with otherworldly strength, and he stood ready for whatever came next. Ethan summoned the strange power with nothing but his will, bending the monster's strength to his own purpose. His already fearsome superhuman physique swelled to new heights, skin as unyielding as forged steel, muscles coiled like springs, ready to unleash devastating force. The jagged spikes that crowned the creature's body shattered harmlessly against his ironclad defense. Madness burned in the monster's eyes, its mind long since consumed by the beast within, reduced to a maelstrom of primal instinct. But Ethan himself was unnervingly composed. Every motion he made flowed with the precision of a choreographed dance. He struck like a storied hero in a legend. Each punch landed squarely on the creature's snarling face, bones crunching under his blows, its roars of agony ripping through the air. With every crushing strike, a shockwave tore outward so fierce that any ordinary onlooker would taste blood in their ears and feel their skull quake. This unleashed power was Ethan's final gambit against the demons, a deadly gift reserved only for the strong enough to wield it. Only an unbreakable will can master the demonic power within, to embrace its strength without losing one's mind. Wealthy warlords and mighty generals may wield influence and gold, but when faced with the lure of monsterhood, they too often falter, becoming little more than playthings for demonic forces. Likewise, the condemned on death row, crushed by fear and hopelessness, succumb to the same corruption, transforming into frenzied killing machines. Samurai Ethan stands apart. Having committed every fiber of his being to the way of the sword, his spirit is honed to unshakable clarity. Even as he wades through that churning sea of demonic energy, he never loses himself. He knows exactly where he ends, and the darkness begins. With each passing moment of the fight, Ethan's techniques grow more devastating. His strikes unfold with the precision of a master sculptor, blades of air carving through flesh and bone. Limbs fly, sinew snaps, and still he presses on, relentless. At last, with a final thunderous blow, the aberrant creature collapses beneath his fists, its monstrous life extinguished and its body pummeled into unrecognizable pulp. What's the success rate of this demon potion? President Guhai guided the still shocked investors into the conference room. As they stepped inside, they slowly collected themselves. The energy remains stable, Guhai said, clicking a button to illuminate the screen behind him. Our tests confirm a success rate north of 90%. President Kokai cleared his throat before responding. After all, the only person to master demon powers so far is Samurai Wakatsuki. Chapter 1159, The Surrender of the Wu Clan. As a close friend, President Guhai couldn't very well let Ethan be the first to undergo the experiment. He only greenlit the procedure once countless death row inmates and violent criminals had already served as test subjects. To everyone's surprise, Ethan mastered the demonic energy without faltering. He didn't devolve into a monster. Instead, his physical strength simply skyrocketed, a benefit perfectly suited to a samurai warrior. Most fighters and martial artists deliberately risk their lives battling monsters, hoping a brush with death would awaken the spiritual power sealed within them and elevate them into awe-inspiring seers. They believed only such a life-and-death trial could truly unlock the ancient, mysterious forces. But Ethan refused to follow that bloody path. He volunteered for the experiment solely because he trusted President Guhai and believed in his research. Julius Reinhardt's fate was no kinder. Unlike President Guhai, Hayami Katsumasa of Toyo Electric Power Company chose a far more ruthless approach. He harvested the flesh and blood of captured demons to brew new, potent elixirs. When these demon-infused potions were administered to humans, the raw demonic power within them was tempered, rendered more controllable, and Julius himself emerged as one of the few fighters now carrying true demon essence in his veins. Then there's the Wu clan. Unlike the Jiangxi faction or any other martial family, their singular obsession is Ethan, the man once whispered about as the god of the world. No one, in their eyes, rivals his strength. For the Wu clan, Ethan is divine incarnate, the pinnacle of power they've pursued for generations. They will stop at nothing to find him, to glean his secrets, and to channel his might as their own. Miss Shizuka Hiratsuka, are you one of the three maids? Shizuka Hiratsuka had just finished dispatching the last of a snarling pack of demons when they appeared. A contingent of men in black suits and long coats, each wearing eyes as cold and lethal as drawn blades, suddenly blocked her path. Who are you? Shizuka Hiratsuka stared at them in astonishment. These strangers actually radiated spiritual power. We are the Wu family, the spokesman replied with a deep bow. With boundless reverence, we have long sought the privilege of an audience with the supreme god. Shizuka glanced over the group, noting who wasn't there. Wu Leian, the young martial prodigy famed for his ferocity in combat, was conspicuously absent. His fiery temperament made him better suited to the heat of battle than to this solemn, uncertain diplomatic mission. Equally missing was Wu Huiliang, the family's patriarch, calm, experienced, and the very cornerstone of their clan's stability. It wasn't indifference to the divine that kept him away, but an acute sense of responsibility. As long as Huiliang stood, the Wu family's complex network of alliances remained intact. Should anything go wrong, the clan could not afford that upheaval, no matter how fearless he might be. Shizuka raised an eyebrow and asked, "Then you're all spiritualists?" "Yes. Once we master the method, the Wu clan can produce as many spiritualists as we need." The Wu clan was the first family-based assassin syndicate to have spread its reach across the island nation and even into the wider world. Though firearms were indispensable in modern society, clan members prided themselves on their close-quarters combat abilities. What their representative omitted, however, was the staggering price the Wu clan had paid for that power. Of the 500 members who'd ventured into the monster's lairs, only 100 survived to awaken as true spiritualists. The rest were torn apart by fiends or left crippled for life. Yet no one in the Wu clan harbored regrets. Power always demanded sacrifice. Victory was glorious, but even in defeat, they believed there should be no room for remorse, only resolve. "Then," the Wu clan's envoy pressed, "will you pledge yourself to Ethan?" Shizuka Hiratsuka let a small smile play at her lips. She'd anticipated this question. At her words, the envoy's eyes gleamed with curiosity and calculation. He'd caught the subtle shift in her tone when she'd spoken Ethan's name, an honorific reserved for someone of exceptional status. In that instant, he realized that this unassuming woman was no mere associate, but a confidant at Lord Ethan's side. He immediately shifted his tone, speaking with newfound respect and earnestness. "Yes, Miss Shizuka Hiratsuka. The Wu family stands ready to be God's most devoted instrument and to lend every ounce of our strength to his great cause. As the world's premier assassination syndicate, our combat prowess and execution are unrivaled, precisely what Lord Ethan requires." His confidence rang with conviction. It sprang not only from the Wu family's storied achievements, but also from their shrewd realization that Ethan was no omnipotent deity. If he truly needed nothing, he would never have welcomed the Busujima, Hiratsuka, and Kasumigaoka families into his fold so readily. For the Wu clan, this was a generational opportunity, a chance to ride God's coattails and rise to heights they could never reach alone. Shizuka Hiratsuka nodded slowly. "I'll inform Lord Ethan of your offer," she replied. "How he chooses to respond, however, is beyond my authority." She paused, surveying the assembled spiritualists. Judging by the number and caliber of those present, these factions must be backed by high-ranking officials or some other formidable power. Hiratsuka Shizuka paused, wary of committing before she truly understood Ethan's wishes and needs. Across from her, the Wu clan's envoy visibly relaxed. The promise she'd just made was no small thing. At the Tiangong Temple, countless petitioners clamored for even the faintest sign of the god's favor, yet Lord Ethan had never granted a clear answer to anyone. To secure this tentative pledge from Shizuka was a rare honor indeed. "Thank you, Miss Hiratsuka," the envoy said with deep sincerity. "Your generosity will not be forgotten by the Wu family." He inclined his head respectfully, then, with his small retinue, quietly withdrew. Shizuka watched them go, reflecting on how far she'd come. She wasn't the only one Ethan had summoned. Saiko Busujima and Shiyu Kasumigaoka had also earned his audience. But to date, only these three women had gained the privilege of speaking with him. In the shadows of high society, their families now formed an unspoken alliance. The Busujima household lent its formidable military might. The Hiratsukas contributed the economic backbone. And the Kasumigaokas, well, they occupied a role all their own, unpredictable and invaluable. Together, these three houses stood ready, each bound by Ethan's silent command and by the unsteady promise of divine favor. The real work, they all knew, was only just beginning. Despite their modest roots, no illustrious political ties or sprawling business empire, the Kasumigaoka family enjoys a unique advantage, official backing from the island nation's government. Thanks to that support, Yuta Kasumigaoka's father was installed as president of a major corporation and granted a remarkable 90% annual tax exemption. Even though Second New Tokyo City lies in ruins, the three great families have already staked their claim on the most coveted territory, the Tiangong district. Chapter 1160, Big Monster Beyond the Temple Town. Everyone is a townsfolk. In the past, Minato, Chuo, and Chiyoda looked down on the other wards of Tokyo as mere country backwaters. Now it is Amamiya district casting that same glance of disdain, at its neighboring wards, at the rest of Tokyo, even at the entire country. After all, in a world unraveling at the seams, Amamiya's unshakable safety makes it priceless. In the softly lit hall, Busujima Saiko knelt with such effortless poise that time itself seemed to pause around her. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through the half-open door, scattering warm, golden patches across her form and lending her an almost ethereal glow. Her slender waist curved like a spring willow, supporting the sumptuous folds of a finely woven kimono. The silk hem barely grazed her small, delicate heels and lifted ever so slightly with each breath, as if the quietest exhalation might ripple through the still air. Beneath the fabric, her body was rounded and full, reminiscent of an early summer peach on the verge of ripening, so plump, so ripe, it threatened to burst with sweet juice at any moment, its surface shining with an irresistible lure. Saiko Busujima sat perfectly still, every inch of her bearing, both tender grace and a barely contained edge of danger. She seemed like a midnight blossom from some distant shore, beautiful enough to draw you in, deadly enough to make you pause. Her face was finely sculpted, her brows softly furrowed with a trace of sorrow, yet she radiated an unspoken strength, as if every line of her countenance echoed resilience. A gentle, almost secretive smile curved her lips, hinting at feelings too intricate to name. It was the kind of smile that invited closeness but warned you. Once you leaned in, you might never find your way back. Her posture was nothing less than art. Each subtle movement, crossing a leg, tilting her head, spoke of impeccable poise and an inherited grace often called Yamato Nadeshiko. In that moment, she belonged wholly to a world defined by ritual and beauty, her calm elegance seemingly carved into the very air around her. The hush was broken when Shizuka Hiratsuka pushed open the door and came in, her footsteps heavy with fatigue. The former teacher, who had once stood at the front of a classroom wielding chalk and doctrine, now moved with the quiet wariness of someone who'd left that old life behind. Her identity had changed beyond all recognition. She was now a maid in service to Ethan, the god of this world. As Shizuka Hiratsuka watched Saiko Busujima seated with unshakable poise, a tangle of emotions stirred within her. Even among Ethan's maids, Saiko's refinement and cultivation set her apart. The very air around her seemed infused with an elegance Shizuka could never hope to match. Shizuka knew her own manner was more forthright and vigorous, a stark contrast to Saiko's quiet grace. "Teacher Hiratsuka, you've returned," Saiko greeted, her tone as clear and gentle as a spring breeze over a still lake, carrying a subtle warmth. Though the three of them, Saiko, Shizuka, and the other maid, served under Ethan's roof, Saiko insisted on calling her former mentor teacher. Even in these ruined halls, where titles and ranks were blurred by circumstance, Saiko's heartfelt respect remained unwavering. Shizuka Hiratsuka let out a smile that blended helplessness with relief. In that small curve of her lips lay a nostalgia for years past, a clear-eyed acceptance of the present, and boundless hope for the future. "Saiko," she said softly, "just call me Shizuka." The sincerity in her voice made it plain she'd embraced this new role. She was no longer the classroom teacher on a podium fielding student questions. She'd become a guardian, a beacon of hope for Tokyo's survivors amid the rubble. Her gaze drifted to the knife laid out before Saiko Busujima. It was a long, unadorned blade with sleek lines that caught the sun and reflected a cool, steely light, an extension of Saiko's own calm intensity. Unable to hold back her curiosity, Shizuka asked, "Are practicing sword zen?" Saiko nodded almost imperceptibly, her eyes still locked on the knife's tip, as if seeking secrets in its steel. "Yes," she replied in a measured tone. "When spiritual energy clashes with demonic power, it sends ripples through both forces. That turbulence is both our greatest challenge and our greatest opportunity. As long as we can stabilize and control these fluctuations," Saiko Busujima said, her eyes alight, "our spiritual power will make a quantum leap." She spoke with absolute confidence, even though every word was something Ethan had taught her. Time and again, she and her fellow spiritualists had proven that by resisting the corrupting press of demon energy in battle, their own powers grew both stronger and more resilient. Before Shizuka Hiratsuka could reply, the training hall doors slid open, and Ethan entered. At his arrival, Saiko sprang to her feet and gave a sharp salute. "Master!" Her tone was filled with unwavering admiration and loyalty. Shizuka, by contrast, merely leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Hey, Ethan," she greeted him with an easy smile. Though she wasn't fond of rigid formality, Ethan valued her honest straightforwardness just as much as he appreciated Saiko's devotion. Ethan met them both with calm authority. "Listen carefully. A major monster has been spotted in Kyoto. You two are assigned to neutralize it." Saiko's heart skipped a beat. "King Ghidorah destroyed Tokyo, Master," she reminded him, recalling the grim reports. "Now you're sending us after another monster in Kyoto?" Shizuka's brow knit together in concern. "The only creature that could level a city like that, it has to be King Ghidorah again, right?" Ethan's expression stayed unreadable. "That's what I need you to find out. Prepare immediately. You leave in 1 hour." As the two young spiritualists exchanged a startled glance, the weight of their mission settled over them. Tokyo had already fallen, and now the fate of Kyoto rested in their hands. Shizuka's gaze flew to Ethan, desperate for reassurance, or at least more information. But Ethan's face was unnervingly calm, almost indifferent, and that only made his words hit harder. "Is there another monster this powerful out there?" Shizuka and Saiko felt a chill recalling King Ghidorah's aura. The world-destroying dragon had left a trail of devastation no one could stop. Could they, two fledgling psychics, stand against such a force? "Ethan," Shizuka found her voice, "can you alert the island government about this?" Ethan met her eyes coolly. "You're free to do that, but know this creature isn't King Ghidorah. It's different." "How so?" Saiko leaned forward, heart pounding. "It's intelligent," Ethan said, his tone flat. "It won't smash everything in sight. Instead, it'll exploit every resource, Kyoto's massive population included, to build its own legion." Shizuka and Saiko exchanged horrified looks. Monsters with strategy? The implications were terrifying. An enemy that learned, planned, and adapted would be exponentially more dangerous than a mindless destroyer. And now they realized just how steep the climb ahead of them would be. Chapter 1161, The Great Monster of Kyoto. It feeds on human fear, greed, hatred, every dark emotion, and turns them into its own strength. Its prey is us. With each passing day, the demons and monsters you face will grow more numerous and powerful, perhaps even surpassing what we endured in Tokyo. Ethan spoke in a calm, chilling tone, as if declaring an immutable law of nature. Beside him, Busujima Saiko and Hiratsuka Shizuka felt a cold dread settle in their bones. They knew they could not linger at Tiangong Temple. Without another word, the two women hurried away and alerted the island government. The news reached the capital within hours. In the government's crisis chamber, ministers pored over satellite images of Tokyo's ruins and eyewitness reports of Ethan's confrontation. Every screen, every map, carried the same tragic message. The nation's wounds were still raw. Broken families, collapsed buildings, the memory of an enemy who grew stronger with our terror, all of it had seared itself into the public consciousness. No one had dared forget. No one could. Prime Minister Takayama and his cabinet listened intently as Saiko and Shizuka recounted Ethan's warning. If Tokyo's devastation was a prelude, Kyoto, the cultural and political heart of the island, was next in line. The prospect was unthinkable. Should Kyoto fall, the blow to national morale and stability would be immeasurable. A hush fell over the room. On the long conference table lay photos of Kyoto's ancient temples, imperial palaces, and quiet lantern-lit streets, places that had stood for centuries. Now they stood exposed, vulnerable to an enemy that thrived on our worst fears. Ethan's final words echoed in their minds. Humanity's own darkness would be used against it. The ministers knew what they had to do. Mobilize every defense, rally every ally, and steel the people's hearts against despair. The fate of Kyoto and the country itself hung in the balance. Outside, the first pale light of dawn crept across the horizon. It found a nation bracing itself for the greatest fight it had ever known. Once Kyoto falls, the economic devastation alone will be beyond measure, and the blow to public morale could be fatal. The nation risks sliding into prolonged chaos and recession, even losing its status among the world's advanced economies and slipping back into the ranks of developing countries. No government could survive such a collapse of confidence. True, in terms of population, output, and international clout, Kyoto may not rival a metropolis like Tokyo, but two such calamities in rapid succession would break the island nation's spirit. If Tokyo and Kyoto both succumb, national unity could fracture, and with it, the very will to endure. Recognizing the stakes, the government activated its highest emergency protocols. Departments across the board, from the self-defense forces to the police, from firefighting brigades to medical teams, were placed on full alert. In a matter of hours, an unprecedented defensive campaign quietly took shape. It was as if an invisible hand had bound every institution into a single organism, each cell braced for the coming storm. Yet even with the entire nation mobilized, uncertainty gnawed at the leaders in the halls of power. Their opponent was still unseen, and that unknown threat remained the gravest worry of all. Modern weapons proved woefully inadequate against those supernatural creatures during the Battle of Ghidorah. Still, governments cannot afford to stand by and do nothing. Even if all they can offer is combat support, evacuation assistance, and disaster relief, that's infinitely better than leaving every decision to a handful of high school students and teachers. If those teenagers are more capable than prime ministers and cabinet members, we might as well hand over our seats to them. Evacuating Kyoto, an ancient city renowned for its dense population and rich history, presented an almost impossible challenge. Ethan had supplied only a rough area where the monster might appear. No precise coordinates, no timetable. With the threat lurking somewhere amid millions of residents, finding it was like seeking a needle in a haystack. Undeterred, the government immediately launched an emergency evacuation plan. They established priority tiers to move the most vulnerable first: the elderly, children, expectant mothers, and those with serious illnesses. Then, through a network of buses, trains, and emergency shelters, they began the colossal task of relocating the city's inhabitants to safety. Simultaneously, emergency evacuation orders blared from every radio station, television channel, and social media feed. Remain calm, evacuate in an orderly fashion. Yet faced with an unseen horror, Kendall's citizens panicked anyway. Streets overflowed with frantic families, traffic ground to a halt, and chaos reigned. Monsters had appeared in Kyoto before, and each time, hunters had dispatched them. But this time was different. To earn the title of Great Yukai, a creature must surpass ogres, ghosts, and even A-rank demons. This new adversary towered above all previous threats. Even America's intelligence advisors drew a sharp breath when the reports came in. "You're telling me it could be a dragon-level monster attacking Kyoto?" they asked, trying to process the implications. "That's what our reconnaissance confirms," came the terse reply. "It's stronger and smarter than any monster we've encountered. More than brute force, it's strategic. It's using Kyoto's massive population as a nutrient source to accelerate its evolution. If we don't stop it now, it will soon spawn an army of lesser yukai." As sirens wailed in the distance and evacuation convoys snaked through the city, America's strategists scrambled to devise a plan, one that would be both swift and cost-effective. Ethan sat at the head of the conference table, tension knotting his shoulders. Around him, senior officers and government advisors exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Isn't there some extreme measure we can take before this thing reaches full strength?" he asked. "What if we use precision-guided bombs on Kyoto? I know it sounds brutal, but losing a few thousand lives now to save millions later, it seems like the only rational choice compared to letting an unstoppable monster level the entire city." A hush fell over the room. Behind Ethan, a world map dotted with red target indicators glowed on the wall. On paper, his plan was tactically sound. Ghidorah, classified as a dragon-level threat, could slice through even America's combined naval forces without breaking a sweat. Not even 2 carrier strike groups could guarantee a win against such a creature. From a purely strategic standpoint, striking now made sense. But strategy wasn't the whole story. Minister Watanabe leaned forward, voice tight. "You're proposing we bomb our own citizens to starve the monster? This is an island nation. Ordering that kind of action is unthinkable, both politically and morally." Ethan stared at the map, feeling the weight of every life it represented. "I know, but if we wait until Ghidorah grows stronger, there may be no choice at all, and no one left to debate the ethics." Silence reigned as each person grappled with the horrifying trade-off. In the end, they all realized the same unpalatable truth. Ordering the bombing of Kyoto was more than any government could stomach. If they couldn't act, they might as well resign themselves to watching the monster do it instead. Ethan stared at the intelligence briefing before him, disbelief and dread warring in his chest. "So you're telling me," he said slowly, "that all we can do is sit here and wait for death, watch that monster grow until it threatens the safety of the entire world?" His aide bowed his head, voice heavy with regret. "I'm afraid that's exactly it." Since King Ghidorah's devastating assault, the United States had made it plain they'd no longer lift a finger to help. They'd quietly begun plans to abandon their fleet base and relocate off the island altogether. The memory of that catastrophic battle still haunted them, an entire navy brought to its knees, countless ships now rusting wrecks on the ocean floor. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine at the thought. No one had expected their closest ally to be so callous. But left with no alternative, the island nation had resolved to stand on its own. Orders went out to recruit every available superpowered ally, folk martial artists who'd become spiritualists, the so-called demons serving in the military, but the effort faltered almost at once. Yes, many volunteered to defend their homeland, but just as many refused. With powers that earned them fear and respect wherever they went, why risk everything now? And so the government found itself helpless to compel these gifted individuals into service. Any attempt at forced conscription, they feared, would tear the country apart in civil war. Facing impossible odds alone, Ethan realized they had little choice but to prepare for a fight on their own terms, no matter how desperate the struggle would be. With the personnel they had, their only option was to scour Kyoto for any trace of the giant monster. Soon after, a military helicopter touched down, Saiko Busujima, Shizuka Hiratsuka, and Utaha Kasumigaoka stepping out in full combat gear.